Hey guys, tonight we're doing something a little unwise. You're about to step out of your comfort zone and straight into medieval Europe. No sunscreen, no Wi-Fi, no antibiotics. And spoiler alert, you probably won't survive this. Seriously, you're going back to a time when 30 was considered a solid life expectancy, dental hygiene was an abstract concept, and the best case scenario for a sore throat was a priest and a shovel. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'm curious, where are you watching from and what time is it right now? Let me know in the comments. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The first thing you notice is the sill. Not the distant, romantic wood smoke and fresh bread kind of smell you've seen in overly filtered period dramas. No, this is something else entirely. It's like someone mixed compost, horse sweat, spoiled meat and desperation, and then baked it under a medieval sun. You're in a village, or what counts as one, and there's no pavement, just mud slicks and hay-matted tracks. Everything is wet. Even things that shouldn't be wet feel damp to the touch. You're not sure if it's fog or just particles of human suffering hanging in the air. The buildings are low and uneven, made of timber and wattle, their thatched roofs crawling with movement, rats probably. Kids dart around barefoot through puddles that aren't just water. You try not to think about it. An old woman squints at you from a doorway, like she's seen your brand of confusion before and finds it amusing. You realise quickly, you stick out. You're wearing modern clothes. You might as well be wrapped in neon signs that say time traveller. The fabric alone is enough to set off alarms. Your jeans scream sorcery. Your synthetic shirt, alchemy, your boots, alien technology. One barefoot kid stops chasing his pig to point at your shoelaces like they're forbidden treasure. You're suddenly very aware that if you don't sort this out soon, someone's going to call for the priest or the local pitchfork committee. Everything feels raw, your skin itches with the humidity, your eyes water from the smoky air, and you haven't even moved more than 5 steps. The roads are churned up messes, especially in the fall when rain is constant. Pigs wander freely. Chickens too. There's a surprising number of geese, and they are terrifying. One honks at you with the kind of ancient rage that says, "I've outlived plagues." People glance your way as they pass, hauling buckets, kindling, or small children. Most avoid direct eye contact, which is a small mercy. You catch fragments of conversation, if you can call it that. The language is strange. You know it's technically English, Middle English, but it may as well be Elvish with a head injury. Your brain is working overtime trying to decode what sounds like someone gargling marbles while reciting Chaucer backwards. You spot a well. It's at the centre of the village, naturally, and people line up for it. A man draws water and sits in it, possibly out of habit, or maybe because the line was too short. You step back instinctively, and then to your horror, a small boy slips, falls face first into a puddle, and just gets up like that's fine. His mother scolds him, not because he fell, but because he lost the bucket. This is your welcome party. The Middle Ages have arrived and they are not here to coddle you. You start walking, partly to look purposeful, partly to escape the stench of something unspeakable being rendered in a cauldron nearby. A donkey watches you pass with a slow blink, and somehow you feel judged. The further you go, the more the landscape reveals itself. Thatched roofs give way to open fields, surrounded by low stone walls. The farmland is active, even if it looks like organised chaos. Everyone has a job. Everyone except you. And here's the kicker. It's not just the smell or the mud or the weirdly aggressive poultry that throws you. It's the weight of everything, the poverty, the labour, the simplicity. Yes, but a simplicity built entirely on survival. You see children hauling water like it's normal. Old women stooped from years of manual work. Hands calloused, skin sun-scorched, bodies broken young. You're absurdly out of place. Now for a fun little fringe-geek fact, because hey, you came here to learn and suffer, and medieval villagers believed that smells could spread disease but also cure it. So people carried sweet-smelling herbs in little pouches to ward off sickness, or at least the odour of dying neighbours. It didn't work, obviously, but it gave them some hope. You, on the other hand, are holding your breath and wishing for a full-body air filter. Here's your historical fact of the night. Historians estimate that around 90% of people in medieval Europe lived in rural areas like this one. Cities existed, sure, but most folks never saw them. They were born, lived as scenes, and died within a 20-mile radius. Travel was rare, privacy rarer, and shoes optional. And here's the first debate we'll dip into. A nice gentle one to get your time-travelling brain warm. Some scholars argue that medieval peasants had more leisure time than modern workers, citing feast days and the slower pace of agricultural life. Others call that nonsense, pointing to the non-stop seasonal labour, malnutrition, and general struggle to not die of exposure. You'll get to decide for yourself if you make it past lunch. Your journey is just beginning, and already you're filthy, disoriented, and one goose away from a full-blown panic attack. You haven't even figured out where to sleep yet. You need clothes. Real ones. The kind that won't get you interrogated by the nearest village priest or end up with you mistaken for a demon. Right now, every stitch on your body is a red flag. Zippers, sorcery, printed logos, witchcraft, anything dyed an unnatural colour. Suspicious at best, heretical at worst. And your underwear, don't even think about mentioning it. No one here wears anything even remotely that clean or elastic. Honestly, you could probably trade your socks for a goat. So here you are, trying to blend in but dressed like a space traveller who got lost on the way to Coachella. The villagers keep side-eyeing you, whispering behind their hands. You hear the word fae tossed around more than once, which isn't great. You're either a fairy creature or about to get blessed with holy water until you burst into flames. You need a disguise, and fast. The first step is understanding the fashion rules of the time. And by rules, we mean the few pieces of fabric people can afford and haven't worn into oblivion. Medieval peasant clothing isn't exactly high fashion. Most people wear undyed wool in dull earth tones, brown, grey, maybe a soft green if they're feeling spicy. Layers are a must, because it's cold always, even in summer. Everyone wears a linen under tunic if they're lucky, then a woolen over tunic and sometimes a cloak. Footwear, if they have it, it's leather, handmade and about as comfortable as damp cardboard. You realise you have two choices: steal someone's clothes, morally dubious and potentially fatal, or charm someone into giving or trading with you. You're not exactly fluent in Middle English, but you try the universal language of desperation and awkward smiles. You approach a woman working near a hut, wringing out what appears to be laundry, though everything still looks suspiciously brown. You make a motion like you're cold, then point to your jeans and grimace. You say the word garment, hoping it translates. She narrows her eyes. She says something you don't understand, then gestures for you to follow her. You're half sure you're walking into a trap, but at this point, hypothermia might beat goose-based death. She leads you to a small outbuilding that smells like wet straw and something that once was a sheep. From a wooden peg she pulls a rough, itchy tunic and a pair of equally scratchy hose. You mime thankfulness. She mimics your face like it's hilarious. You slip into the clothes behind a cart, shedding your modern layers and instantly regretting it. The wool is heavy, the hose saggy, and everything smells faintly of goat and mildew. But now you look less like a spaceman and more like a minor background character in a history documentary. Progress. Here's your quirky fact for this section. Medieval people didn't use buttons the way we do. Buttons existed, but they were mostly decorative for centuries. Instead, people used brooches, ties, laces, and straight up just let things hang loose. You, unfortunately, have no buttons, no brooches, and no clue how to tie a medieval belt, so you improvise with a length of rope you found near a trough. You look like a fashionable sack of potatoes. You've never felt more appropriately dressed. Now for a historical nugget. Sumptuary laws. These were actual legal codes across medieval Europe that told you what you could and couldn't wear based on your class. Silk? Only for the nobles. Fur-lined robes? Forget it unless you're royalty or a bishop. Wearing something above your station could literally land you in court. So even if you could scrounge up a lord's cloak, walking into town wearing it would be like driving a Ferrari into a peasant riot. The good news? Your new look is so aggressively average that you've achieved maximum invisibility. People stop staring. One man even nods at you in that mutual struggle sort of way that says, "Hey, we both hate today too. You're in." Almost. Except you forgot your hair is too clean, too styled, too not greasy. You rub a little dirt into it for good measure. Then some more. And just to really sell it, you spit into your palm and smear it across your forehead like some grimy war paint. A nearby child watches with a mix of awe and horror. Congratulations, you're officially one of them. This is a good time to touch on the broader context. Clothes in medieval Europe weren't just about warmth or style. They were identity. Your cut, your fabric, your colour, even your hat told people everything about you. Your job, your wealth, your youth, your faith, your gender. Women covered their hair after a certain age, men wore coiffes or hats, and children ran around mostly in long shirts until puberty. Your new tunic says you're poor but harmless, just how you want it. But here's the part scholars still debate. Just how uniform was this really? Some argue that medieval people were rigidly controlled by class when it came to fashion. Others suggest there was more flexibility, especially in rural areas where clothing was handed down, repurposed, or made by necessity. You're standing in a world that values conformity, but also one where people are just trying to not freeze to death. There's nuance here, wrapped in layers of wool and body odour. Now clothed in scratchy authenticity, you start walking again, this time with more purpose. A woman calls out a greeting you can't quite understand, and you nod back with what you hope is the universal face for, "Yep, definitely, just a normal peasant here." A dog sniffs your leg and walks away in disgust. You take it as a compliment. As the village hums around you, blacksmith hammering, a rooster screaming like it owns the place, kids shrieking in a non-emergency way, you feel a shift. The air is still thick with smells and your boots are already soaked through. But something clicks. You're less of an anomaly now. You look like you belong, sort of, until you smile. Of course. Got to remember not to show too many teeth. Those are suspiciously clean, too. You're a step closer to surviving the day. Now, if only anyone could understand a word you say. You open your mouth to speak, and immediately regret it. Whatever noise just came out of your throat sounds like modern English took a wrong turn and got lost in the 1st century. The man you're trying to ask for directions squints at you like you've just insulted his ancestors. He replies with a string of sounds that might technically be words, but if they are, they've been fermented in centuries of vowel shifts, swallowed a few consonants, and washed down with a jug of ale. Welcome to the Middle Ages, linguistically speaking. You are hopelessly, gloriously lost in translation. Middle English, if this is England. Old French, if you've stumbled into Normandy. High German, good luck. Latin, reserved for monks and people who get paid to feel superior. Wherever you are in medieval Europe, chances are no one understands you, and you don't understand them either. The modern English you know is still a couple hundred years away from existing in any recognisable form. So for now, you're left with hand gestures, exaggerated facial expressions, and the occasional shrug of pure surrender. You try again, pointing at a goat, then miming walking, then pointing at yourself and shrugging. The man now looks less suspicious and more entertained. He scratches his beard thoughtfully, then bursts into a series of rapid phrases that make your ears ache. You smile, nod politely and walk away, because honestly, that goat probably wasn't going to help anyway. Here's the thing no one tells you about time travel. Communication is a full-time job. Every second is a puzzle. Every interaction is a test. Even body language doesn't work the way you think it should. You wave at a passing woman and she recoils slightly. Turns out showing your open palm isn't friendly everywhere. You try a thumbs up. Big mistake. She hurries off, muttering something that sounds like a prayer or a curse. So how do you survive in a world where you can't speak the language? Start small. Observe. Listen. People repeat things, phrases, commands, greetings. You start picking out patterns. A man yells "ho" when calling to someone. A woman scolds her child with a stern neigh. You hear "godden" in the morning, which probably means good day. You repeat it under your breath a few times until it sounds passably authentic. Soon, you find yourself picking up fragments, like a medieval toddler learning to talk by sheer exposure. You point to bread and say, "bread." A merchant corrects you. "Plaf." You say it back awkwardly. He nods. Progress. It's not glamorous, but it's functional. You're building a crude duct tape vocabulary of survival terms. Food, water, friend, sick, no please, sorry, help. You'll sound like a caveman with a concussion, but at least you're communicating. Quirky fact break. Some medieval dialects were so localised that villagers from one town couldn't understand people from the next. A traveller could walk 15 miles and feel like they had entered a completely different country. So if you think it's just you who can't understand anyone, don't worry. Half these people can't understand each other either. It doesn't help that the educated folks, the ones who do speak something closer to Latin, are either in monasteries or extremely suspicious of strangers. You consider seeking out a monk to help you translate, but then you remember how often monks were also scribes and how scribes loved documenting weird events. You're already the stuff of local gossip. Maybe don't add mysterious outsider with unusual grammar to the church archives. One interesting little twist. Gestures that would land you in trouble today might actually help here. Bowing slightly earns respect. Not making too much eye contact, a sign of humility. When in doubt, just keep your head down and nod a lot. It's better to look a little dim than like a threat. The less you talk, the more people assume you're from some distant village with a funny accent. That's your best cover story. You're not a foreigner. You're just local-ish. And here's our historical fact for the night. Literacy rates were abysmal during this era. In most rural areas, fewer than 10% of all of the population could read or write. Those who could were usually clergy, aristocrats, or scribes. Even nobles often dictated their letters to someone else. So even if you had a note explaining your situation, odds are no one could read it. And if they could, they'd probably assume you were possessed by a demon for producing it. This leads us into tonight's scholarly debate. Some historians argue that medieval people were more oral culture focused, passing stories, news and history through spoken word, songs and performance. Others believe there was a deeper informal literacy among merchants and townsfolk than records show. Either way, in your current situation, the oral tradition isn't helping. You're stuck with pantomime and trial and error vocabulary, like a mime trying to order soup in a haunted tavern. Eventually, you find yourself near a marketplace, loose term for a muddy open square where people shout at each other over baskets of fish and bundles of turnips. You hear the same phrases again and again. You start repeating them, clumsily at first, but with growing confidence. A few merchants laugh at your accent, but none of them throw rocks, so that's a win. A small boy runs past you, chanting something. You catch the rhythm, the rhyme. It's a children's song, simple and repetitive. You listen, you mimic. The words lodge in your brain like a catchy ad jingle. Congratulations, you've just learned your first medieval sentence by way of playground chant. The sun begins to dip behind the soot-stained rooftops. The village glows orange in the fading light. You lean against a low wall, brain buzzing with new words, tongue sore from unfamiliar syllables. You've managed to survive a full day without being burned, arrested, or accused of witchcraft. All without speaking more than a dozen half-garbled words. That's a triumph in this timeline. Still, the pressure is building. You'll need to improve your communication if you want to barter, travel, work, or even pray. Every word you learn is a brick in the wall of your cover story. And you'd better build fast, because tomorrow someone's going to ask who you are. And, time traveller probably isn't going to cut it. Hunger sneaks up on you like a bandit in the woods. At first, it's just a quiet grumble, easy to ignore while you're distracted by the sounds, smells, and mild existential panic of the medieval world. But then it digs in, a hollow gnawing, a twist in your gut, the faint lightheadedness that whispers, "You haven't eaten since before time travel was involved." You begin scanning your surroundings with the desperation of someone who once had fast food on speed dial, but is now considering whether moss is technically edible. There's food around, sort of. The marketplace is still half alive, though most of the good stuff is long gone, and what remains is deeply unappealing. A fishmonger slaps the last greyish cod onto his table with a wet thwack. A woman sells turnips that look more like fossils. A man gnaws something vaguely bread-shaped and looks vaguely dead inside. You swallow hard. It's going to take some creativity to not starve here, or worse, die of whatever lives in medieval soup. Let's start with the basics. Food in this era is deeply regional, highly seasonal, and terrifyingly unpredictable. If you're in a peasant village, you're living off grains, legumes, and whatever the garden coughed up that month. If you're inland, fish is rare unless salted or smoked. If you're coastal, it's everywhere and still somehow disappointing. And unless you're nobility, which you very much aren't, you're not seeing meat more than a few times a year, unless it's squirrel. Your first option is to buy food, which is hilarious, because you don't have any medieval money. Not a single silver penny or battered farthing. You pat your pockets like maybe one fell through time with you. No luck. Your only currency is awkward smiles and vague hand gestures, which so far haven't been accepted by the bakery or the guy selling suspicious pies. So you consider plan B, barter. Luckily your backpack contains a few modern items you forgot to ditch. A ballpoint pen, a lighter, a half-eaten granola bar, a pair of earbuds, one sock. You feel like a wizard holding contraband. Carefully you approach a stall where a woman is selling what appears to be boiled roots. You offer the lighter. Click. Flame. Her eyes go wide, she crosses herself and then mutters a prayer. But she doesn't run. She hesitates, then offers you a bowl of steaming, brownish stew. You take it. You eat it, slowly. It tastes like sadness and boiled hay. There's something rooty in it and something else vaguely meaty, though it could be a mushroom or the concept of meat that once sat near the pot. But you eat the whole thing because your stomach doesn't care that it tastes like despair. It's food. Here's your historical fact. Medieval peasants got most of their calories from bread. Not the crusty baguette you're picturing, but dark, heavy loaves made from rye or barley, sometimes stretched with things like mashed beans or even sawdust in lean times. Yes, sawdust, bon appetit. Bread was so important that in some regions it was used as currency, or as plates. Trencher bread, thick slabs used to hold stew or meat, were eaten afterward, or given to the poor. You wouldn't call it sanitary, but it was filling. Now for your quirky little detail. Eels. Medieval Europeans were obsessed with eels. River eels, sea eels, smoked eels. These slippery creatures were cheap, abundant, and technically not considered meat, so you could eat them on fasting days. Some monasteries reportedly consumed thousands of eels a year. There were eel-based stews, pies, and even eel-flavoured ale. You have not been offered an eel today, but it's only a matter of time. As you choke down the last spoonful of beige fluid, you feel a tap on your shoulder. A boy about 10 years old stares at you, wide-eyed, then points at your bowl, then your face. He speaks in a high-speed torrent of local dialect, but you catch a few words. Strange, eat, and fire stick. He's clearly fascinated, or alarmed by the lighter. You quickly pocket it and nod. He grins, then runs off. Cool, you've officially made an impression on the neighbourhood youth. Hopefully not the kind that gets you thrown into a well. Now let's talk danger. Food is not just sustenance here, it's a minefield. Storage is unreliable, refrigeration doesn't exist, meat goes bad fast, dairy even faster. And water? Don't drink the water. It might look clear, but odds are it's hosting a bacteria convention. That stew you just ate was probably the safest option available, which is deeply unsettling. People here die from food all the time. Not poison in the dramatic royal assassination sense, but quietly from things like ergot-contaminated rye, mouldy bread, or just straight-up rotten meat. Some villagers believe spoiled food is caused by demons. Others blame sin. You, with your modern stomach and lifetime of pasteurized privilege, are at extreme risk. Which brings us to tonight's scholarly debate. Were medieval diets actually healthier than modern ones? Some historians argue that the average peasant had a surprisingly balanced diet. Lots of grains, fibre and fresh vegetables, and way less sugar and processed junk. Others point out that balanced doesn't mean sufficient. Malnutrition was rampant, vitamin deficiencies were common, and let's not forget, life expectancy hovered around 35. Still, there's something poetic about it. Food here is deeply tied to the land. People know what they're eating because they grew it, caught it, or traded for it. Meals are slow, communal. You don't eat alone. Even now, as you sit on a rough wooden bench, bowl in hand, you're surrounded by people doing the same. Faces tired but alive. Laughter rising over pots. Children chasing geese with bits of crust. For a moment, it's almost warm. Your stomach calms. You're full, sort of. You're still slightly terrified, definitely dehydrated, and unsure if you've just eaten rat or root. But you've passed another test. You fed yourself in the Middle Ages, and that's no small feat. You set your bowl down, wipe your mouth on your sleeve like everyone else, and try to look like you've done this 100 times before. Someone offers you a piece of bread, dense, chewy, vaguely sour. You nod and take it. You chew slowly. You try not to think about sawdust. Tomorrow you'll need to figure out where your next meal's coming from. For now, you've earned a few quiet minutes. One less hunger, one more problem solved. You're going to need a name, a story, an identity that doesn't scream lost interdimensional tourist. Right now, you're just the weird one, and while medieval people are used to a fair amount of weird, they're also suspicious by default. Suspicion here isn't a casual thing, it's a survival instinct. Outsiders bring disease, unrest, heresy, bad luck. So unless you enjoy the idea of being questioned by someone holding a Bible in one hand and an axe in the other, it's time to craft a backstory. First challenge, names. You can't just call yourself Jason or Madison or Skylar or whatever your 21st century handle happens to be. Those don't exist yet. In this place you need something rustic, local, vaguely biblical or occupational. Think simple. John, Thomas, William? If you're a woman, go for Alice, Matilda or Joan. Bonus points if your name references something you do or where you're from, though since you're from somewhere between Target and Existential Dread, you'll need to improvise. You pick a name, let's say Thomas. It feels right. Soft, plain, forgettable. Exactly what you want right now. If someone asks, you're Thomas of, Eastgate. You heard that word earlier while eavesdropping on some nearby traders. Could be a place, hopefully not a prison. You say it out loud a few times until it sticks. Thomas of Eastgate. Not bad. You sound poor and generic. Perfect. Next comes the backstory. Why are you here? Why do you talk weird? Why do you squint at everything like you're reading invisible signs? The best lies are rooted in truth. So you decide you're a traveller, a labourer looking for work. Your village? Burned down, bandits maybe, or plague. Nobody asks too many questions when you say plague. Just step back and look sad. This is where it gets tricky. You need to remember your story, play it straight, and not say anything that hints at modern life. No references to machines, no jokes about electricity, no offhand mentions of airplanes or pizza. You are now fully immersed in your role as a barely literate drifter who owns the clothes on his back and maybe a tragic goat. You try it out. Approach a man stacking firewood near the edge of the village. You say your name slowly. Thomas, Thomas of Eastgate. You gesture at the horizon, then make a sweeping motion like fire and run away. He stares at you. You add a fake cough, just in case. He frowns, then nods grimly. Either he understands or he's just emotionally exhausted enough to accept any story. Either way, you're in. The man says a few words, one of which sounds like stay or rest. He points to a shed. It's more of a wooden box with a hay pile inside, but he's offering you shelter. You nod, bow slightly, and say blessings. A safe choice, vaguely churchy. He grunts, which seems to be medieval for, "You're welcome, now get out of my way." Quirky fact time. Surnames were still evolving in the Middle Ages. Most people didn't have last names as we know them today. Instead, they were identified by occupation, baker, smith, location, hill, brook, parentage, Johnson equals John's son, or physical trait, short, strong, white. So when you tell someone you're Thomas of Eastgate, you're playing by the rules. You might even end up listed in file on a tax roll, if you survive long enough to be taxed. Historical note. Travelling strangers were a double-edged sword in medieval communities. On one hand, they were a source of news, gossip, sometimes even trade. On the other, they were potential threats, thieves, spies, or plague carriers. Most villages operated on tight social circles. Everyone knew everyone. So when someone like you appears, the default reaction is skepticism. Unless, of course, you bring value. Which leads us to a pressing question. What can you do? You don't have a medieval skill set. You can't forge a horseshoe or gut a pig or thatch a roof. But maybe you know enough to fake something. You remember bits and pieces from documentaries, YouTube tutorials, and the occasional random Wikipedia binge at 2 a.m. You know some herbs can treat fevers. You know that clean water prevents disease. Maybe you could pass yourself off as a kind of healer or herbalist, or even a scribe if no one checks your handwriting too closely. Or maybe your best bet is to just be quiet and lift heavy things. You're not the only person wandering around looking for work. Labourers move between farms and the villages, offering strength for food and lodging. It's not glamorous, but it keeps you fed and unnoticed. The fewer questions you're asked, the fewer mistakes you'll make. Now, let's wander into a bit of historical debate. Some scholars argue that medieval identity was more flexible than we assume, that in smaller communities, as long as you were useful, people didn't care much about your origin story. Others insist that strangers were marked and marginalised, watched, feared, sometimes driven out. Your experience so far suggests both are true. You're tolerated because you're quiet and poor, but no one trusts you yet. That trust will have to be earned day by exhausting day. Night is falling now, smoke curls from chimneys blending with the rising mist. You sit outside the shed you've been offered. Pulling your wool tunic tighter against the cold, your feet ache. Your fingers are stiff, you smell like stew, sweat and fear. But you're still here. You have a name, a backstory, a place to lie down. You're officially a character in this world. Someone walks past and murmurs something that might be, "Good night." You reply with your best guess at a medieval equivalent. Good day, Anne. It sounds right. They nod. And just like that, you're no longer just lost. You're someone, not a time traveller, not a glitch. Just Thomas of Eastgate, the quiet guy in the goat-scented tunic who doesn't talk much but seems to work hard and keeps to himself. It's not glamorous, it's not safe, but it's survival. And that, in the Middle Ages, is more than most can ask for. You wait to bells. They ring out across the village in staggered bursts, slow, deliberate, reverent. Not alarm bells. These are gentler, echoing from the stone tower of a church you hadn't noticed yesterday, partly because it's half hidden by trees, and partly because you were too busy not dying. The sound cuts through the early fog low and sonorous, like the village's heartbeat. Everyone else seems to know what to do. People stop, turn, murmur brief prayers. One man crosses himself mid-yawn. You stand awkwardly beside the hay pile you slept on, unsure if you should kneel, bow, or pretend to tie your non-existent shoes. This is your first real run-in with the church. Capital T, capital C. It's everywhere. Not just the literal church building that squats at the village's edge like a mossy stone guardian, but in the gestures, the greetings, the rhythm of life. Here, religion isn't just personal, it's atmospheric. You breathe it in. It governs when you work, what you eat, what you say, and how suspicious everyone gets when you say the wrong thing. And you will say the wrong thing. Because you, my friend, are from a world where people worship crystals, follow astrology memes, or opt out entirely. Back home, faith is optional. Here, faith is oxygen. You don't need to believe in the church, you just need to survive it. The bells mean morning prayer or mass, depending on the day. Sunday is full-on spectacle. Other days are shorter, quieter. People are heading toward the church in small, hunched groups, like sleepy sheep headed for spiritual shearing. You decide to follow at a distance, not because you're suddenly devout, but because being the one person not going to church would be like walking around town with "witch" carved into your forehead. You step inside, and the temperature drops 10 degrees. Stone walls do that. The interior is dim, lit by narrow windows that filter grey morning light into little shafts of floating dust. Candles flicker along the altar. A heavy scent of beeswax and something musky. Maybe incense, maybe mould hangs in the air. Villagers file in and take their places. Men on one side, women on the other. There are no pews, just stone floors and tired knees. You do your best to mimic the locals. When they kneel, you kneel. When they murmur prayers in half Latin, half mumble, you pretend to whisper along. You have no idea what's being said, but the tone is unmistakable. Reverence, repetition, ritual. The priest appears in robes that have definitely seen better centuries. His voice is slow and deliberate. You catch phrases like in nomine patris and sanctus. That's Latin. Your Latin professor from college would be so proud, if not deeply alarmed, at your current situation. Now comes the fun part. Keeping your face under control. One wrong smirk, one skeptical eyebrow, one visible moment of doubt could single-handedly destroy your fragile cover. These people watch. Maybe not consciously, but they notice. The church is not just a place of worship, it's a moral surveillance system wrapped in stained glass and threats of eternal fire. Step out of line, and you don't just risk social awkwardness, you risk heresy. A very real word with very real consequences. Historical fact time. In medieval Europe, the church was more powerful than any king. It owned land, collected tithes, controlled knowledge, and held the keys to both salvation and damnation. Refuse to attend mass? Suspect. Criticize a priest? Dangerous. Get caught with unnatural ideas, like heliocentrism or, being too interested in science, and you might find yourself in a dungeon, or worse, a bonfire with your name on it. The quirky fact of the night? Holy relics. Every medieval church had one, or claimed to. A shard of the true cross, a saint's finger, a tear from the Virgin Mary bottled for eternity. These relics were believed to hold power, healing, protection, divine blessings. Pilgrims travelled for weeks just to kneel near them. And yes, there were scams. A few churches probably shared the same saint's thumb. The medieval world had knock-off relics like you wouldn't believe. You spot the reliquary here. A dusty glass box near the altar, cradling what looks like a yellowed bone fragment. A young boy stares at it in awe. You stare too, mostly to avoid eye contact with the priest, who's now emitting incense and chanting something with increasing volume. And here's tonight's scholarly debate. Was the church's grip on daily life purely oppressive, or did it provide a sense of structure and stability in a brutal, chaotic world? Some historians argue that faith was a tool of control, obedience masked as salvation. Others suggest that for the common folk, the church offered hope, charity, even education when nothing else did. The truth is likely both. A system that ruled with fear, yes, but also one that offered warmth in a cold world. As the service ends, people shuffle out slowly, whispering to each other, casting the occasional glance at the reliquary or toward the priest's bowed head. You follow, stepping back into daylight like someone emerging from a medieval fog machine. The sun has clawed its way over the treetops, casting long shadows across the muddy paths. A woman with kind eyes and more teeth than most offers you a piece of bread. "For the traveller," she says in heavily accented words. You nod. You thank her. She gestures to the church and says something like, "He watches." You're not sure if she means God or the priest or just the general vibe of omnipresent judgment, but you nod again. You've learnt that nodding is safer than speaking. You walk back toward your shed, chewing slowly, watching the smoke rise from the chimneys. The village is waking up in earnest now, cows mooing, roosters being roosters, children yelling about something that's either a game or a legitimate emergency. You're beginning to realise that navigating the church might be just as important as navigating the roads. Maybe more. Because while you can survive hunger and cold and the occasional goose attack, you cannot survive an accusation of heresy. You lie back in the hay, staring at the rafters, and whisper a prayer, not out of faith but out of sheer survival instinct. You don't care who's listening. You just want to make it through one more day without accidentally becoming a martyr. You're not sure when it happens exactly. Maybe it's on your second day hauling firewood, or the fourth time someone tosses a half-eaten onion your way and calls it lunch. But you start to understand the rules of the social game here. It's not a game in the fun sense. More like a landmine-strewn chessboard, where everyone knows their place, and the only winning move is to stay exactly where you are. Welcome to the medieval social hierarchy, rigid, brutal, and baked into every step you take. At the top are the nobles. You haven't seen one yet, but everyone talks about them like you'd talk about a hurricane. Distant, powerful, and likely to destroy your house if you say the wrong thing. There's a manor house outside the village, barely visible through the trees. No one dares go there unless summoned. Rumour says the lord's cousin once had a man whipped for walking too loudly past the gates. Whether it's true or not doesn't matter. The fear is real enough. Beneath the nobles are the knights. Think of them as armoured enforcers with extremely questionable manners and a deep love for unnecessary violence. A few passed through the village 2 days ago. Their horses were huge. Their eyes were dead, their armor looked impressive but smelled like something had died inside it. Everyone cleared the road without being asked. You did too, fast. Then you have the clergy, the priests, monks, and occasionally nuns who float somewhere between spiritual guides and local bureaucrats. The priest here, the one from church, isn't cruel exactly, but he watches people like a man trying to decide which sheep to butcher next. He's probably the most educated person within 50 miles, and he knows it. You avoid him when you can. Below that, everyone else, commoners, labourers, peasants, serfs, you. Let's talk peasants for a second, because that word gets tossed around a lot but rarely explained. Peasant is a catch-all term, but there's nuance to it. Some are freemen. They rent land, owe taxes, but can technically move around and make choices. Others are villains, legally bound to the land they were born on. They can't leave, can't marry without permission, and basically exist to work the Lord's land until they drop dead. Serfs, essentially. Slavery adjacent with just enough wiggle room to make you think you have rights. You don't ask people which category they fall into. That'd be like walking into a party and asking who's most in debt. But you can guess by the way people carry themselves. Freemen look around. Villains look down. You, of course, are an outsider with zero official status, which means you're even lower than a serf. You're not even on the board yet, but you've been lucky. Your silence and hard work have earned you a sort of non-threatening drifter status. People grunt at you when you pass. One man even tossed you a turnip. You're practically beloved. Quirky fact time. In many villages, pigs had more freedom than most humans. They roamed the streets, entered homes, wallowed wherever they pleased. There were even laws in some towns that punished pigs for crimes, seriously. One pig was famously put on trial and hanged for eating a baby. The pig got a better trial than most peasants ever would. So yeah, You're somewhere between nameless farmhand and court-summoned swine in the social pecking order. Your historical fact, the feudal system. You've probably heard of it, but living it is another matter. It's not just a chart in a textbook. It's a daily performance. Every greeting, every gesture, every interaction is coded with class. A bow too deep could mark you as a suck-up. Not deep enough, and you're disrespectful. Saying, "my lord," at the wrong time can get you mocked or punished. Saying nothing might be worse. You saw it firsthand this morning. A boy, young maybe 9, accidentally splashed mud on a well-dressed man's boots. The man grabbed the boy by the ear, shouted something about manners and bloodlines, and then backhanded him hard enough to drop him. No one intervened. Not the boy's mother, not the priest who walked by seconds later. The boy scrambled to his feet, bleeding from the lip, and said, "Thank you." That wasn't sarcasm, that was training. You start to understand the invisible walls here. Everyone knows them, no one questions them. They're carved into the air, burned into posture, whispered into every meal. People don't aspire up, they survive across. Lateral movement is the dream. Marry into a slightly better situation, rent a slightly larger field, avoid dying of something gross until you're old enough to limp. And yet, there are cracks. A merchant passed through today. He rode a donkey and had 2 teeth too many for this village. His clothes weren't noble fancy or birni, but the fabric was dyed, and his boots were too clean. People gathered when he unpacked his cart, spied this, cloth, dried fruit, strange little glass beads. The priest bought something quietly. A woman traded a blanket for what might have been ginger. For a brief moment, status flexed. The merchant was poor but different. He had stories, connections, goods from the outside. That's when it hits you. Your best social weapon is not invisibility. It's novelty, but just the right amount. Not enough to scare people. Just enough to keep them interested. And here's our scholarly debate. How rigid was medieval society really? Traditional historians paint it as a brick wall. You're born into a class and die in it. But newer research suggests there was more movement than we think. Skilled tradesmen, merchants, even successful farmers could rise slowly and painfully. Was it rare? Yes, but not impossible. And if it's not impossible, well, maybe there's hope for Thomas of Eastgate. You settle into your usual spot by the well, sipping thin ale that tastes like someone washed a barn with yeast. You nod to the woman next to you. She nods back. A man walks past, balancing a sack of grain, and doesn't even glance at you. That's progress. You still don't have the status, or power, or rights, really, but you have a name, a tunic, and a vague sense of your place in this broken, beautiful social pyramid. It's a start. And tomorrow maybe someone lets you carry the grain. You catch your first cough on the 6th day. Nothing dramatic, just a tickle at the back of your throat. But in this century, a tickle can mean the difference between slightly under the weather and "we'll pray for your soul." You try to shrug it off, drink a little water, sleep it away, but by sundown your head feels like it's stuffed with wool and your bones ache like you've aged 20 years in 12 hours. It's happening. You're getting sick in medieval Europe. Congratulations. You've officially entered nightmare mode. Modern you, even mildly ill, would have stayed home with soup, a heating pad and Netflix. Maybe you'd have Googled your symptoms and spiraled into an absurd self-diagnosis before taking 2 ibuprofen and being fine by morning. But here you have access to a wealth of remedies, none of which work and many of which are actively harmful. You try to fake health, but your nose has other plans. It starts running, constantly. Someone hands you a rough scrap of linen. You're grateful until you realise it's already been used. By several people. You politely pretend to wipe your face with it, then tuck it into your sleeve like it's a cherished relic. You're soon approached by a woman, mid-40s maybe. Sharp eyes, stained fingers, smells faintly of rosemary and damp roots. She peers at you, then reaches into her basket and pulls out a bunch of wilted green leaves. She says a few words you half understand: illness, bitter, brew. You nod and she points to your nose. More nodding. She's the village herbalist, or apothecary, or just a local with a deep understanding of what weeds won't kill you. She boils something in a small iron pot over a smoky fire. The result is a sludge-coloured tea that smells like earth and regret. You sip. Tastes like someone steeped a sock in regret. You thank her anyway. She gives you more herbs wrapped in cloth and mimics chewing motions. You do your best to look grateful, even as you wonder what the odds are that she just handed you poison out of pity. Here's your historical fact for the night. Medieval medicine was a chaotic mix of classical theory, folk wisdom, religious superstition, and trial and error disasters. The most dominant medical belief was the theory of humours, 4 bodily fluids, blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile, that had to stay in balance. Illness, they thought, came from an imbalance. The solution? Bleeding, purging, vomiting, or possibly a lecture about your moral failings. Now, a quirky little detail. Leeches weren't just for draining blood. They were seen as refined medical tools, used by professional physicians, who were often far more dangerous than the humble village healers. Some people collected their own leeches from ponds, which is a horrifying image you're now stuck with. Even more terrifying? Sometimes they reused them, and no, they didn't rinse them first. You try to avoid drawing attention to your condition. You've seen how people treat sickness here, with fear. Illness is not private, it's suspicious. People whisper about curses, punishment from God, or worse, plague. The village lost people last year, someone tells you in hushed tones. They don't want it happening again. You start coughing more discreetly, you breathe through your mouth, you stop touching things, you rest more than usual. The shed is still yours for now, and you curl up under scratchy wool with your herbs nearby like protective talismans. Your fever rises and falls, you sweat through your tunic, you hallucinate slightly, probably, but it might just be the mouldy bread you ate for lunch. You start to understand how fragile life is here. A common cold in your time was an inconvenience. Here, it's a roll of the dice. You've become deeply invested in the phrase "don't die of a stupid reason." And here's the scholarly debate. Were medieval healing practices completely useless, or is that just modern arrogance talking? Some researchers argue that while humoral theory was wildly off base, herbalists and midwives often had valuable plant knowledge passed down through generations. Others counter that for every helpful remedy, there were 5 that were pure nonsense or deadly. The truth likely lies in the middle. Most care was supportive, not curative. If your body could fight the illness, great. If not, well, you were already halfway to heaven. Eventually the herbs start to help, or your body just decides to rally. Your head clears, the coughing eases, the fever breaks in the early morning hours, leaving you weak but aware of your surroundings again. The herbalist returns, check your pulse. Yes, they knew it about those, and gives a satisfied grunt. She leaves a small dry bundle of something under your straw bedding and pats your foot. It feels weirdly intimate, like being knighted by someone's grandma. You're not out of the woods yet, but you're walking again, slowly. The villagers notice. They nod. One man hands you a chunk of bread without looking. A child waves, then wipes their nose on their sleeve. Kids are the same in every century. You still don't speak the language fluently, but your illness has done something words never could. It made you human, vulnerable, familiar. Now you're not just Thomas of Eastgate. You're Thomas who got sick and lived. That's social currency here. It's hard to explain how good it feels to move again, to breathe the smoky, manure-laced air and not cough, to drink muddy water and believe, maybe delusionally, that your immune system can handle it. You walk a little taller, if only because you're not hunched over your own misery. Getting sick here taught you more than any book could. You learned what people fear, what they trust, who they go to when everything starts falling apart. And you've learned that in a world without hospitals, the best medicine is a woman with a basket of weird leaves and a total disregard for flavour. You survived medieval medicine. Just barely, but you did. The town smells worse today, which you didn't think was possible. It hits you the moment you step out of your shed, a thick, wet slap of humanity and livestock and food scraps all melting together under a sun that suddenly decided to assert its dominance. You gag immediately, but quietly, because everyone else is walking around like this is perfectly normal. They're just stepping over puddles that might be water or might be worse, waving away flies with the resigned grace of people who've long since given up the fight. You are, officially, inside a medieval city now. It's not a grand one, not like the cities of song or myth, not Paris or London or Prague. This is more of a swollen market town with aspirations. A few stone buildings poke up in the centre like uncertain teeth, while the rest sprawl outward in a tangle of timber houses, shops, and hastily constructed sheds. There's no real layout. Streets curve not because of planning, but because they had to go around something that used to be important, and probably still stinks. You arrived here on the back of a cart full of cabbages. The farmer who let you hitch a ride grunted more than he spoke, and you spent most of the ride trying not to get a splinter through your thigh. But it was free, and in this world, free is rare enough to count as divine intervention. Now that you're here, the farmer is gone, the cart's vanished into the mess of streets, and you're standing in the middle of a chaotic city square, already attracting side eyes because you're not actively yelling at anyone. This place is a full-body experience. The smell is the star of the show, of course, but the noise comes in second. There's shouting from every direction, vendors advertising goods, animals protesting their very existence, and children playing games that somehow involve whacking each other with sticks and laughing like demons. Bells ring somewhere in the distance, and you're not sure if they signal a prayer hour, a market opening, or another fire, probably all three. Then there's the texture underfoot. You're not walking on cobblestones. You're walking on centuries of filth layered over packed dirt. Horse manure, spilled ale, food waste, and the general ooze of a population without plumbing. You try not to look down too much. You try really hard not to step in anything that hisses. Historical fact time. Most medieval towns didn't have sewers in the way you're imagining. Some larger cities had basic drainage systems. London had a version of one as early as the 12th century. But in most places, waste just went wherever. Amber pots were emptied into the street, often with a cheerful shout of "Garde-lou" as a warning. It didn't help. People slipped in it. People fought in it. It was everywhere. And that brings us to our delightful quirky fact. Medieval cities often had designated muck rakers. Yes, that was a real job. These were the folks paid to clean up the worst of the worst, shoveling waste, clearing cesspits, and hauling it all to the edge of town, often under the cover of night. Imagine waking up every morning knowing that your job was to literally move human excrement by the cartload. And yet, they were essential. You kind of want to find one now, shake their hand, maybe offer a hug. After they wash, of course. You wander the city square, trying to look like you have a purpose. That's the trick to blending in here. Look like you're busy. People who stand around get noticed, not in a good way. You stop at a bread stall. The loaves are small, hard, and cost more than you expected. You trade a few hours of grunt work to a tavern owner to afford one. He's sceptical of you until you carry 2 barrels and clean a spill without puking. By the time he hands you the coin, he mutters, "Quiet type, good back," and waves you off. You're learning slowly. Social life in a city is different than in the village. More people, yes, but less warmth. There's anonymity here, which is nice. No one cares if you're Thomas of Eastgate or Thomas of Nowhere. But there's also suspicion. Everyone is watching everyone else, checking for signs of illness, of theft, of foreignness. You realise quickly that staring too long at anything, a building, a person, a religious symbol, marks you as odd. So you keep moving, and then you see it. The river. Or what's left of one. It snakes through the edge of the city like a greasy blue-grey vein, choked with debris and the occasional floating chicken. Kids swim in it. A woman scrubs clothes into it. 2 men urinate into it while arguing about something. You stare in horror, then look down at the canteen someone gave you earlier. The water in it came from this. You're drinking this. It's a miracle you're alive. Now tonight's scholarly debate. Were medieval cities death traps, or vital hubs of progress? Some historians argue that they were centres of culture, trade, and even surprising innovation, hosting schools, markets, and public events. Others point to the overcrowding, the fire hazards, the complete lack of hygiene, and the constant plagues, and say no. These were disease incubators disguised as towns. Both are correct, in their own miserable ways, because despite the danger, there's life here. There are plays in the town square, someone staging a morality tale with a guy in a devil mask and a fake tail. A woman sells sweetened nuts from a cart and kids beg her for samples. A scribe sits under an awning, offering to read or write letters for coin. The smell is awful, but the energy is electric. You begin to understand why people risked the city. It was more than mud and sickness. It was possibility. You find a place to sleep, an alley behind a cooper's shop, dry enough and slightly less rat-infested than your last few options. You lie down on a pile of hay that smells vaguely like vinegar and watch the stars appear one by one above the rooftops. Somewhere nearby, someone plays a pipe, badly. Dogs bark, people shout, but you're warm, full of bread, and, for now, not dying. You're alive in a medieval city, and that's no small feat. Travelling in the Middle Ages isn't the adventure you thought it would be. There are no scenic hikes or charming little detours with well-marked trails and rest stops that sell overpriced sandwiches. No tour buses, no maps. There's you, your 2 aching feet, a wooden walking stick you picked up from a ditch, and about 50 miles of unpaved road ahead. You're sore in places you didn't know had nerves. Your boots are soaked from stepping into a puddle that turned out to be bottomless. And you've started talking to birds for companionship. They're not interested. This isn't even a long trip by medieval standards. You're trying to get from one town to another. Just a few days' walk. But in this world, a few days can stretch into forever. Especially when every step comes with a brand new challenge. Mud so thick it could swallow a cow. Bandits who'd love to borrow your clothes with knives. Stray dogs that look hungrier than you. Roads that disappear entirely into swamp. And of course the classic medieval travel hazard, getting lost and never being heard from again. There are no road signs. You pass maybe one marker carved into a mossy rock and it says something in Latin, or possibly just gibberish. You try to follow the most well-trodden path, but that just leads you to a field full of sheep and a shepherd who shouts at you for scaring them. You wave and back away slowly. The sheep stare, unimpressed. After a few hours, you realise you're walking in silence, which would be peaceful if it weren't so eerie. No humming traffic, no buzzing lights, not even the distant whine of a phone. Just wind in the trees, the crunch of your boots, and the occasional disconcerting snap of a branch in the underbrush. Every squirrel sounds like a threat. Every shadow holds a possible mugger, wolf, or cursed peasant ghost. Eventually, you stumble upon something that passes for an inn. Calling it an inn is generous. It's a large house with a crooked sign hanging out front, a painted animal that might be a bear or a pig or just a confused dog. There's a stable beside it, a smoking chimney, and a few drunken voices leaking out of a shuttered window. You knock. The door opens part way and a man with a face like an overcooked ham looks you up and down. You say your name, say you're travelling, hold out a coin you earned in town. He grunts and gestures you inside. The common room is smoky, loud and hot. A fire burns in the hearth. People huddle around trenchers piled with something stew-like. A dog snoozes near the fire, snoring louder than some of the men. You're directed to a corner and handed a bowl of food that smells faintly of ale and disappointment. You eat it anyway. You're learning not to ask what's in anything. The less you know, the better your odds of finishing the meal. After food, you're led to a bed, which is a straw mattress on the floor, already occupied by someone else's snoring. You claim a corner, curl up in your cloak and try not to think about lice. You fail. Here's your historical fact. Travel in medieval Europe was rare and difficult. Most people never left their village. Roads were unreliable, often dangerous, and filled with tolls, both official and unofficial. Merchants and pilgrims travelled in groups for safety. Solo travellers like you? Sitting ducks. Royal roads existed, but unless you're nobility or clergy, or they weren't exactly open to casual foot traffic. And here's your quirky fact for the night. Pilgrims carried special travel passes, or tokens from the church, often shaped like scallop shells or crosses. These marked them as holy travellers and offered some protection. Some people faked pilgrim status just to get safer passage. You consider carving a little fish into your walking stick and telling a people you're on a sacred journey to see Saint Somebody in Whereverville. Couldn't hurt. The next day you set out early, your back stiff and your muscles protesting. The sky is grey. You walk past open fields, gnarled forests, and the occasional cottage with smoke drifting from the roof. Once a rider thunders past on horseback, not sparing you a glance. You step off the road just in time to avoid being splashed with something that was probably not water. As night falls again, you find shelter beneath a tree. You light a small fire, carefully, and chew on a hunk of bread you saved from the inn. It's hard enough to file down a sword, but it's food. You pull your cloak tight and try to ignore the howls in the distance. Could be wolves, could be something worse, you don't want to know. Now, the scholarly debate. Just how dangerous was medieval travel? Some argue it wasn't as deadly as popular culture suggests, that many roads were fairly safe and people were more hospitable than we assume. Others point to crime records, letters and laws that describe entire regions plagued by banditry, fraud and highwaymen. The truth, as usual, lies somewhere between. Travel wasn't constant danger, but it was never safe. You weren't likely to die every time you left town, but you always packed like you might. You drift into sleep eventually, surrounded by chirping insects and the occasional rustle in the grass. Your dreams are strange, a mix of your old life and your new one. Modern buildings tangled in vines, cell towers made of wood and bone. You dream of trains pulled by oxen and laptops powered by candlelight. In the morning your joints ache and your mouth tastes like sadness. But the sun is out, you're still breathing, and the road, whatever's left of it, is calling you onward. It starts with the sound of laughter. Not the polite, filtered chuckle you're used to from modern life, but something raw, like a man who just discovered that, against all odds, life is still ridiculous. You follow the sound through a crooked alleyway, duck under a wooden beam that nearly removes your forehead, and step into what might be the noisiest place you've seen since you arrived in this century. Welcome to the medieval tavern. You've officially found nightlife. And oh boy, it does not come with a 2-drink minimum and a bouncer named Chad. The building is wood, smoke-stained, and leaning ever so slightly as if it's exhausted from centuries of hosting bad decisions. Inside, the air is thick with sweat, ale, pipe smoke, and the unmistakable funk of unwashed bodies trying their best to enjoy themselves. Candles flicker in sconces. The floor is sticky. Everyone is yelling, even the people who aren't mad. A dog is snoring under a bench. You are 95% sure there's a chicken on the rafters. It's chaos, and somehow it feels exactly right. You sit carefully at the edge of a long table. A man beside you slaps your back and hard enough to knock the sentry out of you, then shoves a wooden mug your way. It's full of something dark, foamy, and definitely alive. You take a cautious sip. It's ale, technically, but not the cool, crisp kind you remember. This is thick, warm, and vaguely sour, like someone brewed it inside a leather boot. You keep drinking, not because it tastes good, but because it's affected, and because your other option is water, which we've already established is liquid Russian roulette. Here's your historical fact. Taverns, alehouses, and inns were the centre of social life in medieval Europe. People didn't go out for fun the way we do. They went out because home was cold, dark, and full of chores. Taverns were where news was shared, songs were sung, arguments were settled or started, and communities were stitched together, one tankard at a time. The ale wasn't always great, but it was safer than water and stronger than your will to resist peer pressure. A man across from you starts singing, off-key, loud, full of feeling. Everyone joins in. You hum along, faking the tune until the words start to make vague sense. It's about a fox who stole a goose and ran off with someone's shoes. The chorus involves slapping the table and belching. You blend in perfectly. Someone challenges another man to arm wrestle. Someone else slaps a wedge of cheese onto the floor and insists it's cursed. A game of dice erupts near the fire. A woman in a patched green dress flirts shamelessly with 3 different people, including you. You smile, say nothing, and pretend to be very interested in your mug. She moves on. Time starts to blur. The ale is stronger than it seems. You feel warm and reckless, like maybe you could stand up and tell them all you're from the future and get away with it. You don't. Smart. Instead, you stay quiet, nod at the jokes, laugh when everyone else does, and master the art of enthusiastic invisibility. You're not a star, but you're not an outsider either. That's a win. Now for your quirky little fact. In some medieval towns, ale-making was actually a female-dominated profession. Women known as alewives brewed and sold ale from their homes or small shops. They were respected, sometimes feared, and occasionally accused of witchcraft when their business got too successful. Some wore tall pointed hats to be seen in a crowd, which may have contributed to the stereotypical witch look. So yes, the medieval pub scene might have been run by proto-witches in party hats. You wish you could meet one. As the night rolls on, you witness your first tavern fight. It happens fast, an argument over spilled ale, a shove, a punch, and suddenly everyone's involved. You duck as a stool flies past your head. A man shouts something unintelligible and throws his bread at the wall. The dog barks once, then goes back to sleep. Eventually, the fight fizzles out, and everyone goes back to drinking like it never happened. You sit there stunned, holding your ale with both hands like it might save you. And here's tonight's scholarly debate. Were medieval taverns dens of vice and crime, or essential social spaces that help build community? Some records describe them as centres of sin, gambling, prostitution, drunkenness, heresy. Others portray them as vital to civic life, especially for the working class. In truth, they were probably both. Think of them as the Facebook of the 14th century, equal parts connection and chaos, with the occasional violent comment thread made literal. As you leave, head buzzing, throat scratchy, senses overloaded, you pass a man outside urinating against the wall while singing about his goat. He nods at you like you've both just survived something sacred. Maybe you have. The air outside is cold and damp. The stars are bright. Somewhere a baby's crying, somewhere else a drunk is crying louder. You lean against the side of the tavern and breathe deep. The smoke and noise fade behind you, replaced by the quiet hum of midnight and bad decisions cooling in the dark. You're not quite drunk, not quite sober, not quite a local. But you're closer than you were yesterday, and that for tonight is enough. You wake up in a hayloft with straw in your ears, a sharp pain in your neck, and a level of thirst so aggressive it feels like your tongue is made of leather. Your mouth tastes like regret soaked in old ale, and something is definitely biting your ankle. You sit up, swatting blindly at what might be a rat or an exceptionally brave beetle, and try to remember how you ended up here. The tavern, the singing, the man with the goat song, right, good times. It's morning now, though morning here is less about coffee and quiet routines and more about roosters screaming like they're owed money. Below you, someone is already shouting orders in a language you mostly understand, and there's the steady clatter of hooves and wheels as carts begin to roll out of the city gates. You stretch slowly, because every muscle protests like you ran a medieval marathon in your sleep. Then you remember, you need money. Being a time traveller is not a viable income source in the Middle Ages. No one's paying you to explain the internet or recite episodes of Friends. So if you want to eat anything that doesn't crawl away first, you're going to have to work. The good news is, the options are simple. The bad news? They're simple because most of them involve breaking your body in half before lunch. Here's the list, roughly speaking. You can carry things, dig things, make things, or clean things. That's the economy for someone like you. You're not part of a guild, you don't have a trade, you can't write well enough to be a scribe. You're not noble, and despite what that drunk woman implied last night, you're not pretty enough to make it in the local brothel. That leaves grunt work. Glorious, soul-crushing, back-splitting labour. You start in the market square. Early mornings are prime time, farmers need help unloading carts, vendors need their stalls built or their animals wrangled into pens. You offer your services with the time-tested methods of pointing at heavy things, flexing slightly and saying, work, help. A few turn you away. One man tries to pay you in onions. Eventually you land a gig carrying barrels of dried fish from the docks to a shop 2 streets over. It smells exactly like you'd expect, and one barrel leaks something that definitely isn't to water. Still, the shopkeeper hands you a small coin and a hunk of bread when you're done. You bow like a noble and resist the urge to cry from gratitude. Historical fact time. Day labour was common in medieval towns, especially for people who didn't belong to a guild. Many workers were hired by the day, the job, or even the hour. Payment varied, sometimes coin, sometimes food, sometimes just a place to sleep where the floor wasn't covered in fleas. There was no job security. If you got injured, tougher luck. If someone younger, stronger, or cheaper showed up tomorrow, you were out. Sound familiar? You spend the day doing what might generously be called assorted labour. You carry wood. You help a baker grind grain with a hand-cranked stone mill until your arms scream. You sweep a stell, which is less about sweeping and more about negotiating with a horse who is convinced you're trying to steal its soul. At one point, you help unload a cart of turnips, and a small child hurls one at your head for fun. You're too tired to be mad. Quirky fact of the day, medieval workers had their own version of protective gear. Sort of. Some wore padded jerkins or aprons for blacksmithing, gloves for handling hot items, and thick boots if they were lucky enough to afford them. But mostly your body was your gear. You were expected to toughen up, heal quickly, and keep going. Bandages were usually just strips of old linen. Painkillers, ale, and maybe some poppy extract if you knew a guy, or you just walked it off. Around midday, the town bells ring again, calling people to prayer or lunch, or just reminding everyone that time still exists. You sit on a stone step and eat the rest of your bread, now dry enough to absorb half the moisture in your body. A woman sits next to you, feeds bits of cheese to a cat, and talks at you cheerfully for several minutes. You understand maybe 3 words, but you nod a lot and smile. At one point she laughs so hard she nearly drops her cheese. You've apparently just made a joke you don't understand. You take the win. As the sun dips lower, the jobs dry up. People close their stalls. Street dogs grow bolder. You trade a final hour of wood chopping for a bowl of stew that might contain turnip, cabbage, and whatever the butcher had too much of today. You eat it slowly, savouring every warm, vaguely flavoured bite like it's a 5-star meal. Hunger is the best seasoning. followed closely by not caring what you're chewing. You've made just enough coin to stay indoors tonight. The innkeeper from last night grunts when he sees you, then waves you toward the back. You curl up on a wooden bench near the fire, warmer than you've been in days, your stomach full, your limbs buzzing with overuse. You're not rich. You're not secure. But you earned something today. You worked. You survived. And no one called you a witch. That's your bar now. And here's tonight's scholarly debate. How much social mobility did workers have in medieval towns? Some argue that trade and labour allowed poor workers to rise, maybe not into nobility, but into modest comfort or guild membership. Others insist the system was designed to keep people in their place, with gatekeeping, fees, and nepotism blocking most paths upward. The truth likely depends on where you were, what you knew, and who you knew. Luck, as always, played a bigger role than anyone wants to admit. You fall asleep to the sound of fire crackling and someone snoring nearby. Your hands ache, your feet are blistered, but your pocket holds 3 small coins. That's 3 more than yesterday. And maybe, just maybe, the start of something. You're not just surviving the Middle Ages, you're working them. You don't mean to break the law, you really don't. But in the Middle Ages, that line between innocent mistake and public execution is thin, blurry, and usually drawn by someone who hasn't bathed in 3 weeks and owns a very sharp stick. All it takes is one wrong move, one misunderstood word, one overly long stare, one piece of bread you didn't realise wasn't yours, and suddenly you're in the middle of a situation no amount of polite nodding can fix. It happens on a grey afternoon. The kind where the air feels heavy and everything smells faintly of wet stone and livestock. You've been helping in a tannery, which, by the way, is a job invented by someone who hated noses. You smell like a rotting leather and ammonia, and your hands are stained yellow from something you're pretty sure was alive last week. You're heading toward the market for a break, maybe to spend one of your precious coins on an overcooked onion or a half mug of ale, when you see it, a pair, sitting on a cart, alone, unwatched. To your 21st century brain, this is a mild thing, a snack left out in public. In your world, fruit sometimes gets passed around at offices like weird corporate offerings. In this world, touching produce without permission is social heresy. Taking it, well, that's theft. And theft, even of a single piece of fruit, is a capital crime in some towns. But you don't know that yet. You pick it up, barely registering the action, already turning to look for someone to pay, when a shout cuts through the air, sharp, loud, and very much directed at you. A man barrels over, arms flailing, shouting words you half recognise. Thief! And hands, and something that might have been, hang him, which feels excessive for fruit. You try to explain, stammering apologies, holding out the coin in your palm. Too late. A crowd forms, because of course it does. Medieval Europe doesn't have TV, and spontaneous public drama is the next best thing. People close in fast, some shout. One woman spits near your foot for dramatic effect. You try to stay calm, to speak slowly, clearly, even though your heart is pounding so hard it feels like your ribs might snap. 2 men grab your arms and drag you toward the town square. A bell starts ringing, not the friendly churchy kind. This one is loud, fast, a frantic clang that turns heads and tightens shoulders. You realise to your horror that you're about to be judged. The town crier appears, puffed up like a rooster with authority. He listens to the merchant's accusation, eyes you, and nods solemnly like he's heard this all before and really wishes he hadn't skipped lunch. A man in some sort of official garb, half bailiff, half butcher, asks if you have anything to say. You hold up the coin again, beg with your eyes, and repeat the words you hope translate to, "It was a mistake." And here's your historical fact. Medieval justice was fast, local, and brutal. There was no presumption of innocence. Trial by jury existed. But mostly in later periods and in more organised regions. In many towns, local lords or officials could act as judge, jury, and executioner. Penalties ranged from fines to flogging to death, public and theatrical. A trial could take 10 minutes. A punishment could last hours or days. You're incredibly lucky. Maybe it's your pathetic face. Maybe it's the coin. Maybe the merchant has a soft spot for fools. But instead of dragging you to the gallows, the bailiff declares you guilty of attempted theft and sentences you to a day in the stocks. The crowd sighs, disappointed honestly, but follows you anyway as you're marched to a wooden frame in the square. You're shoved down, arms and head locked into place, and the wooden lid slams shut with a satisfying clunk. You're now the main character in a medieval punishment scene. And here comes your quirky fact. The stocks weren't just for punishment, they were for public humiliation. People were encouraged to throw things. Rotten vegetables, mud, insults, anything that reminded you you'd messed up. It wasn't about pain necessarily, it was about shame. You were made an example, a very visible one. For the next few hours, you're pelted with cabbage, jeered at by children, and lectured by an old man about respecting fruit. A pig walks by and sniffs your boots like it might take a bite. You start to appreciate the full power of the collective judgment. It's not the stocks that hurt, it's the eyes, the whispers, the laughter. You're not human here, you're the punchline. As the sun lowers and your neck aches from holding up your head, the bailiff returns, unlocks the stocks, and waves you off like you're cured. You stumble away, face crusted with vegetable bits, ego bruised into powder. But alive, that's something. Here's tonight's scholarly debate. Did medieval punishment deter crime, or just publicly shame the unlucky? Some argue it kept order in communities where prisons were rare, and law enforcement was improvisational at best. Others suggest it was more about theatre, spectacle that reinforced hierarchy and control. The truth is, as usual, somewhere in between. Fear kept people in line, so did gossip. Nothing spreads faster than the story of a fool in the stocks over a pear. You rinse off in a trough, pat your sore arms, and hobble back to your shed. No one speaks to you on the way, no one meets your eyes, but you're not dead, not even injured, really. Just known. And in this world, being known is risky business. You'll be more careful now, you'll ask before touching, you'll double-check your surroundings, you'll never look at pears the same way again. You lie down, exhausted, and close your eyes, still hearing the crowd's laughter echoing behind your ears. Tomorrow you'll try to blend in again. Tonight you sleep as the guy who stole a pear. You spend the next day trying to shrink. Not physically, though the way your back still aches from the stocks. It feels like you've lost an inch or two. But socially, spiritually, reputation-wise, you walk with your hood low, shoulders hunched, doing your best impression of someone who has never even seen a pear, let alone tried to swipe one. Unfortunately, medieval gossip travels faster than horses, and everyone seems to know about your criminal fruit incident. The woman who gave you stew last week avoids eye contact. The butcher's apprentice smirks as you pass. Even the chickens seem judgmental. And then, as if the universe has decided you haven't suffered enough, you remember a small but devastating detail, your gender. Or more accurately, the way gender dictates everything here. You've noticed it before, of course. The men dominate the taverns, the trades, the authority. The women handle food, children, fabric, and survival. Rules are drawn sharply, worn like uniforms, and rarely questioned. People don't ask if you're non-binary. Dumpool. They don't even ask if you're happy. They just assign you a slot based on your anatomy and expect you to perform the script. Deviate, and you're either a scandal or a sermon. You've been passing easily enough, you chose a plain name, you dress simply, you act quiet, helpful, not worth notice. But now you're watching people closer, and the division is glaring. The women wash linens in the stream with their skirts hiked up, muttering to one another like a parliament of sparrows. The men shout about horses and taxes and how much ale they can hold. Children copy the roles perfectly. A girl who tries to play dice with the boys is shooed away. A boy who trips and cries is called a lamb and told to toughen up. You begin to wonder, what happens when you don't fit? Here's your historical fact. Gender roles in medieval Europe were rigid but not entirely uniform. In general, women were legally and economically dependent on men. They couldn't own property freely, couldn't enter contracts, and had limited options for work. But exceptions existed. Widows often took over businesses. Some women ran taverns or served as healers. Nuns held power in religious communities. In towns especially, necessity sometimes overruled doctrine. But the structure was clear. Men equal authority, women equal submission, or at least that was the ideal. In practice, it was messier. You overhear a group of washerwomen whispering about the Lord's daughter. The one who refuses to marry rides horses like a man and has strange ideas. They don't say it with hate. There's a mix of admiration and worry. One woman crosses herself, another smirks. The implication is clear, the girl is trouble. You suspect you'd like her. And now for your quirky fact of the day. Medieval Europe had cross-dressers, and not just for fun. Some women dressed as men to fight in wars, escape arranged marriages, or pursue trades denied to their gender. There's even documentation of women living entire lives as men, sometimes undetected, sometimes tried for fraud or heresy when discovered. Joan of Arc, the ultimate example, wore mail armour and was eventually executed partly for refusing to stop. You start watching your own behaviour more carefully. How you walk, how you speak, whether your gestures look masculine or feminine. It feels absurd, like performing in a silent play where everyone's judging your costume. You sit differently now, speak less, avoid questions about family or origin. People are already wary because of the stocks. You don't need them wondering if you're hiding something else. Still, you begin to notice small cracks in the roles. A boy who sews beautifully behind the loom when his brothers aren't looking. A woman who swears like a sailor and handles oxen better than any man in the village. A pair of elderly women who live together and finish each other's sentences, never mentioning husbands, never asked about them. It's not open, it's not safe, but it's there. And now the debate. Were gender roles completely fixed or more flexible than we assume? Traditional historians emphasise the legal and theological rigidity of medieval gender expectations. More recent scholarship suggests lived experience was much broader, especially in lower classes where survival trumped dogma. People bent rules when needed, but they did so quietly, carefully, often invisibly. The system tolerated small breaches. As long as no one made too much noise, you try to be quiet. But you're still you, under the wool and dirt and ache. You catch yourself slipping sometimes, saying something too clever, sitting wrong, showing too much curiosity. It's exhausting. Not just being someone else, but being less. That evening, as the sun spills honey over the rooftops, you walk to the edge of the village and sit beneath a tree. You watch the world carry on without you, men bragging, women hauling water, kids playing at adulthood. You wonder what this place would do to someone who couldn't play the part at all. Someone who said openly, "This is not who I am." Would they be ignored? Whipped? Burned? You don't know and you don't want to find out. A dog trots over and sits beside you, tail wagging lazily. It doesn't care what role you play, it just wants crumbs. You give Sit the last of your bread and lean back against the tree, staring up at a sky that hasn't changed in 1,000 years. Tomorrow you'll keep your head down. You'll play your part. But tonight, you breathe in deeply as yourself. You hear the lute before you see the lovers. It's twilight, the hour when medieval life softens, when work slows, fires are lit, and even the air seems to sigh in relief. You're lingering near the edge of the square, rubbing your sore shoulder from a day spent hauling buckets for a mason with zero concept of mercy, when a lazy melody drifts through the air. It's a low, twangy sort of music, rhythmic and wandering. You follow it instinctively, drawn to the sound like a moth towards someone else's terrible life choices. The lute belongs to a boy, maybe 17, lean and long-haired, perched atop a barrel like he owns the entire street. He plays with the kind of casual arrogance only someone in love or recently dumped can manage. Nearby, a girl leans against a stone wall, watching him with a mix of amusement and boredom. He strums. She rolls her eyes. He sings a verse about her eyes being like lanterns. She corrects him. Lanterns are ugly. Try stars. You've stumbled upon medieval flirting, and you are immediately deeply uncomfortable. Love here is not what you're used to. There are no dating apps, no texting under the table, no Spotify playlists. Romance is public, performative, and extremely influenced by land ownership and dowries. Marriages are made by families, contracts, or local customs. Feelings are optional, especially among the wealthy. Among the poor, love still blooms, but it's often a side quest. One that gets derailed by famine, plague, or your beloved getting conscripted into a war they can't spell. And yet here they are, laughing, teasing, sharing bread and glances. You sit on the edge of a fountain and watch them, equal parts enchanted and awkward, like you're witnessing something private by accident. Here's your historical fact. Medieval romantic culture was heavily shaped by the idea of courtly love, a concept popularised in the 12th century by poets and troubadours. It was dramatic, poetic, and usually very inconvenient. A knight pining for a noblewoman he couldn't marry? Perfect. Two peasants making eye contact across a hay cart? Less poetic, but more statistically successful. Most people married for the survival. Love was nice, sure, but not necessary, unless you were a poet, or drunk, or both. The boy on the barrel sings another verse. This time, he rhymes heart with fart. The girl laughs so hard she nearly chokes on her bread. He looks victorious. Quirky fact time, medieval love letters were absolutely a thing. Some were dictated to scribes, some written in painfully formal Latin. others in messy, heartfelt vernacular. One 15th century note reads, "My heart is tied to yours in a knot no one may unloose," which is either romantic or vaguely threatening. Lovers also exchange tokens, ribbons, rings, even on hair. You glance at the lute boy and wonder if he's carrying a lock of her hair in his tunic, tied with string and bad decisions. Of course, for women, love was a double-edged sword. A woman caught in an affair could lose everything: her reputation, her home, sometimes her life. A man might get a fine, a lecture, maybe a slap. Virginity was currency, adultery was a scandal, but mostly if you were rich or if someone powerful got embarrassed. In some towns you could be paraded through the streets as punishment. Forced to wear horns or ride backwards on a donkey, the community loved a spectacle, especially one involving romantic failure. Tonight's scholarly debate: was love in the Middle Ages oppressive or empowering? Some argue that marriage and romantic customs were tools of control, especially for women, who had little say in their futures. Others point to letters, songs and stories that show people carving out space for affection and choice within the system. Secret meetings, whispered promises, passionate poetry written by candlelight. Love was constrained but not extinguished. It found cracks. You've also started to notice another layer, a quieter one. Glances that last too long, two men walking close, not touching, but very nearly. A woman lingering at the bakery just a little longer than necessary when a certain other woman is there. These aren't the sweeping romances of ballads, but they're real, delicate, risky. You realise with a small jolt that queer love has always been here, just hidden behind layers of safety and coded words. The lute boy finishes his song. The girl leans forward, kisses his cheek, and steals the last bite of his bread. He looks like he's just been knighted. She walks off without looking back. He watches her go, then resumes strumming, softer now. You don't understand the lyrics, but you understand the feeling. As the street empties and night pulls over the town like a heavy cloak, you walk slowly back to your usual spot beneath the eaves of the cooper's shop. You pass couples here and there, some bickering, some whispering, one clearly sneaking off toward the woods for reasons that involve zero actual hiking. Love here is messy, limited, complicated, but it still burns. You lie down on the wooden planks, your tunic still damp from a spill earlier, your arms sore from labour. You think about the lovers, the quiet ones, the doomed ones, the ones who found joy anyway, and you realise that no matter the century, people are still trying to make each other laugh with bad songs, still passing notes, still holding hands when no one's watching. The methods change, the feelings don't. You wake to chanting. Not the distant, polite kind of chanting from a church service, but the intense humming in your bones kind. You sit up fast, too fast, and hit your head on a low beam. Swearing softly, you crawl out from under the cooper's awning and follow the sound. It rises and falls like a wave, layered with voices, all chanting the same name: Agnes, Agnes, Agnes. It's not a Sunday. It's not a feast day. Something else is happening. You round the corner into the main square and stop cold. There's a procession, not the joyful kind with flowers and wine. This is slow, serious. The crowd is pressed back along the sides of the road, and in the centre, walking barefoot through ashes and herbs, is a woman, middle-aged, barefoot, hair unbound. Her dress is grey. Her hands are tied in front of her. And behind her, two men in robes, church robes. It takes you 3 seconds to realise what this is. 3 seconds too long. She's being accused of witchcraft. You feel a chill run from your neck down your spine. You thought this was the kind of thing that only happened during those moments in history. Salem, maybe, or a handful of later European panics. But no, right here, right now, it's happening. Here's your historical fact. While full-blown witch hunts didn't hit their murderous peak until the 16th and 17th centuries, fear of magic and heresy was alive and well throughout the medieval period. Anyone, especially women, who behaved strangely or too independently could be suspected. The church had power, but it wasn't just the clergy you had to worry about. Neighbours watched. Rumours spread. Superstition filled in the gaps science hadn't reached. You listen carefully. You catch snippets. Goat died. Child got sick. Herbs. Always the herbs. They say she speaks to plants. That her garden blooms in winter. That she prays at odd times. Not in the church, but in the woods. Someone swears they saw her talking to a cat and that the cat understood her. You want to scream, you want to tell them cats understand everyone. They just don't care. But no one here is looking for explanations. They want spectacle. They want justice. Or at least the comforting illusion of it. The woman, Agnes, says nothing. Her face is calm, not peaceful, just resigned. Like she knows this story by heart and has stopped fighting the ending. Now comes the quirky fact. Witch wasn't always a dirty word. In many communities, especially rural ones, local healers, often women, were essential. They provided medicine, midwifery, advice. Some were called cunning folk, and people both feared and relied on them. But that line between helpful and heretical, razor thin. All it took was one bad season, one dead cow, one jealous neighbour, and suddenly your skill with herbs became evidence of the devil. They bring her to the church steps. A priest steps forward. Holding a scroll, he recites the charges. You can't understand every word, but you get the tone. There's a demand for confession, a promise of mercy, if she names her sin and begs forgiveness. She stands still, silent. Her refusal is taken as proof. And in that moment, something breaks inside the crowd. The mood turns. It's like watching a storm roll in. People start muttering. A man throws a clod of dirt. A child cries. The rope is brought forward, not to hang her, but to tie her to the post they've already built. You feel sick. And here's tonight's scholarly debate. Did people in the Middle Ages truly believe in witches, or was it all power and politics? Some historians say yes. Belief in magic, demons and curses was widespread and deeply real. Others argue that accusations of witchcraft were a convenient way to punish the powerless. Women, widows, healers, the mentally ill, probably both are true. Fear and power rarely travel alone. You want to look away, but you can't. Not because you're fascinated, but because you're afraid. Not for Agnes, though yes, absolutely for her, but for yourself. You've been quiet. You've kept your head down, but you've also healed too quickly from that sickness. You knew things you shouldn't. You once helped someone clean a cut and whispered the word antiseptic under your breath like a fool. You carry strange knowledge. You watch too closely. If Agnes burns, what stops you from being next? The priest finishes his speech. The crowd waits. You expect someone to light a torch, but instead the bailiff steps forward and unties her hands. She's to be held overnight, questioned and, if she repents, banished. Not executed, not yet. You exhale. It's not mercy, but it's not fire either. Not today. The crowd disperses slowly, grumbling. Some disappointed, others relieved. A few teenagers throw stones after her as she's led away. One bounces near your feet. You pick it up, weigh it in your palm, then drop it. Hard. The sun is setting. The sky is bruised with red and purple. You walk away deeper into the alleys, far from firewood and whispers. You crouch behind a cart and breathe, slow and deliberate. That could have been you, that still might be you. You think of the herbalist who helped you when you were sick, the one who gave you leaves that actually worked. You haven't seen her in days. You wonder if she saw this coming, if she's gone, if she ran, or worse. That night you bury your remaining modern items in a shallow hole behind the tannery. The pen, the lighter, even the last scrap of foil from the granola bar. Anything too clean, too smooth, too strange. You can't afford to be different anymore. Not even a little. You are a peasant now, fully, authentically, invisibly. And that is the safest thing you can be. It's the rats you notice first. Not the ordinary ones, the ones that scurry through alleyways or nibble at bread crusts in the shadows. No, these rats are different. Bolder, slower, fatter, somehow. You see them in daylight, waddling across the roads with the casual confidence of creatures who know no one will stop them. One climbs into a sack of grain in full view of a merchant, who doesn't even bother to chase it off. He just mutters something about bad luck and pulls his hood up tighter. You start hearing things too, whispers in the marketplace. A woman from the next village over died too fast. A child was buried with stones on its chest to keep it from rising. A cart pulled in yesterday, carrying 2 bodies wrapped in blankets. No one wants to touch them, not even the priest. Then the coughing starts. It's faint at first. Behind doors, from alleyways, tucked into corners. A dry, persistent cough, like the person behind it has been trying to clear something that won't move. You hear it in the tavern. You hear it in church, you hear it at night, echoing faintly through the quiet streets like a warning bell made of lungs. And that's when it hits you. You've heard about this, you know exactly what this is. It's the plague. The actual Black Death. It's not the first time the world has dealt with a pandemic, but you're not in a world with vaccines or testing centres or Google. You're in a world where illness means judgment, where medicine involves leeches and prayers and sometimes fire, and you're standing right at the edge of a historical catastrophe. Here's your historical fact. The Black Death swept through Europe in the mid-14th century, killing an estimated 30–60% of the population. It arrived from Asia via trade routes and exploded across the continent, aided by fleas on rats and the general lack of hygiene. People didn't understand germ theory. They blamed bad air, divine punishment, or outsiders. Some thought it was a sign of the apocalypse. Others believed it was punishment for moral decay. In either case, panic spread faster than the disease. You walk the village in a haze. You see people hanging herbs in their windows, mostly lavender and rue. You see men walking with cloths tied over their faces, soaked in vinegar. You see people crossing themselves when a sneeze echoes from a nearby house. The priest gives sermons daily now, promising salvation if people just repent hard enough. You're not buying it. And now for your weird little fringe fact. Some people thought the plague was caused by pestilential air released from the underground earthquakes. Others blamed the alignment of the planets. One German medical text claimed it was caused by warm wet winds from the south. So yes, in a world where science is superstition and superstition is science, even the weather gets indicted for mass murder when the deaths begin. Quietly at first. An old woman you'd seen every morning at the well just stops appearing. Then the cooper's assistant. Then the man who sold you pickled onions and once gave you a free one because you made him laugh. His shop is boarded up now, and his house reeks of something you don't want to name. The town shifts, doors are bolted, the streets empty out. Taverns close or stay open with fewer patrons and more whispering. Everyone is watching everyone else. Any cough, sneeze or pale complexion earns a wide berth and a worried mutter. You consider running. Seriously. Just grabbing your things, what little you have, and bolting for the woods, the hills, anywhere but here. You're not built for this. You're not from here. You know what's coming. You've seen the death tolls, the chaos, the paintings. You remember lectures where professors described bodies piled in pits, whole families wiped out, villages turned into ghost towns. And now you're in it. Not reading about it, not watching it, living it. But running might not help, because if there's one thing the plague taught the world, it's that you can't outrun air. That's the debate tonight. How did people actually react to the plague in real time? Some accounts speak of denial, towns holding dances, people throwing parties, refusing to believe what was happening. Others tell of fear so sharp it turned families against each other. Parents abandoning children. Priests fleeing churches. Towns closing their gates to outsiders and letting them die outside the walls. The truth is all of it happened, all at once. Humanity splintered under pressure. Just like always, you try to help. Quietly. Discreetly. You wash your hands in boiling water, use vinegar, you advise people to isolate the sick, without calling it that, of course. You just say, keep them in the back room, make sure they rest. You bring herbs to the dying, not because you think they'll cure anything, but because they'll comfort someone. And you lie awake at night, heart pounding, listening for the cough, because once it starts in you, it's over. The next day, the priest walks through the streets with a censer, waving smoke at doorways and shouting prayers. Behind him are two boys carrying a cart as sent. There's already a body in it, covered with a cloth. You turn away, but the image stays with you. It stays when you try to sleep. It stays when you drink. It settles in your bones like a splinter that won't stop itching. You don't know if you'll survive this. Even with all your knowledge, even with all your precautions, the Black Death doesn't care if you're from the future. It doesn't care if you washed your hands. It doesn't care if you've read the history books and memorized the symptom. It just comes, but you're still breathing. For now, and in this world, that counts as victory. The castle appears like a mirage on the horizon, grey stone rising above the tree line, as if the earth itself decided to stack boulders in defiance of gravity. You see it while walking the ridge of a muddy hill, your pack slung low on your back and your feet halfway to ruined from 5 days of plague-dodging travel. It's smaller than the castles you've seen in movies, but still it looms. Walls thick, towers squat, flags hanging limp in the windless air. The villagers you passed along the road called it the Hold. No one said it fondly. You trudge closer. The castle is ringed by a wall with a wooden outer gate, less a welcoming entryway and more a polite warning. 2 guards stand outside, looking about as alert as overworked livestock. They clock you immediately. One grips a spear, the other just chews something and squints, like he's trying to figure out if you're dangerous or just damp. You try the safest line in your growing medieval script. Looking for work, strong back, quiet. This usually gets you a few hours of shovel duty. Instead, they glance at each other and nod. "We need help mucking the trench," one says with a smirk. You're not sure what that means until they point behind the castle wall that there's a moat. Not a clean, romantic moat. A sewage moat. Of course. Welcome to castle life. Let's get this out of the way. Castles are not cosy. They are not romantic. They are not comfortable. They're stone boxes designed for war, intimidation, and maximum draftiness. Inside, the air smells like mildew and old meat. Everything is dark, even in daylight. Torches flicker along damp corridors. The floors are uneven, the ceilings drip. You step through the outer yard and realise immediately that the inside is just as grim as the outside, just enclosed. Here's your historical fact: castles weren't built for luxury. They were military structures first, status symbols second, and homes only incidentally. The early medieval versions were basically fortified keeps surrounded by walls and dirt. By the 14th century, some got fancier: gardens, chapels, even plumbing of sorts, but most were still cold, smoky, and eternally damp. Heating? 1 fireplace per giant room if you were lucky. Bedrooms were drafty stone cubicles. Privacy was a joke. You're given a task: moving barrels of salted fish into a storeroom that smells like it's been weeping for a century. You haul 1, then 2, then lose track of how many. A kitchen boy hands you a rag soaked in something sour-smelling to tie over your face. You thank him with a nod. He stares a little too long before scampering off. The castle is buzzing with activity. Servants hustle through corridors with trays. Dogs roam freely, barking at shadows. You pass a woman scrubbing a floor that looks like it's never not been muddy. Someone yells for hot water. Someone else is throning up into a bucket. A knight limps by, armour clinking, face red and miserable. You catch the word boil. You look away. And now, for your quirky fact, people slept with their animals. Yes, in the same room, often in the same bed, especially in castles. Not because they were weirdos, but because animals meant warmth. Dogs were encouraged. Cats were tolerated. Chickens, well, they just did what they wanted. In winter, human and beast huddled together like a sad medieval slumber party. You see it firsthand when you're ushered into the servant quarters and told to pick a corner near a sleepy goat. You lie down exhausted. The straw mat is damp. The goat smells like cheese. You try to focus on the warmth. Then somewhere above you hear music. It drifts down from the great hall, muffled lute strings, occasional laughter. The nobles are feasting. You're not allowed near, obviously, but you get a mental picture. Long tables, silver platters, meat you can't name. Fancy cloaks, political marriages, fake smiles. You think of the peasants outside digging graves. You think of Agnes tied to a post. You think of the kid in the tavern who tried to sell you his shoes. Life in the castle is better, but only just. Here's the debate for the night. Was life in the castle truly better than in the village, or just a different flavour of awful? Some scholars argue that castle life offered more food, more protection, even more education for those in service. Others point out that the hierarchy was rigid, the conditions cramped, and the expectations brutal. Servants could be beaten for mistakes. Nobles were often as diseased and miserable as the poor, just with nicer beds to die in. You stay 2 more days, you scrub floors, you polish rusted metal, you clean chamber pots that smell like betrayal. On the second night, a nobleman throws up on the stairs. A servant slips in it and breaks his wrist. No one stops eating. But the 3rd morning, you're woken early by shouting. A message has arrived from the king's court. One of the baron's sons is dead. Plague. Panic spreads fast. The lord locks himself in his quarters. No one's allowed in or out of the great hall. The staff begin to whisper. You take that as your cue to leave. You slip out the back gate before breakfast. A loaf of bread tucked under your tunic and your coin pouch a little heavier than usual. The guard doesn't stop you. He's too busy staring at the tower, where the baron hasn't appeared in 2 days. Outside, the air is cold and wet. You follow the muddy road down, away from the stone walls and smoke. The castle shrinks behind you, swallowed by trees and mist. You survived your time inside, barely. You hear the drums before you see the dancers. It's late afternoon, just before the sky turns to bruised gold, and you're walking along a road that barely qualifies as a road, really more of a suggestion, with just enough dry patches between mud traps to make forward motion possible. You'd slept the night before in a half-burnt barn, shared your last crust of bread with a dog that looked older than sin, and seriously considered becoming a hermit until your boots disintegrated. Then came the sound, rhythmic, thumping, joyful. You follow it, because what else are you going to do? And because it doesn't sound like grief or fear for once. It sounds like life. You reach a clearing, and there it is, a festival, a real honest-to-God medieval village festival. You don't know what the occasion is. Saint's Day, harvest, the rare day no one's actively dying. But it doesn't matter. The village has gone all in. Ribbons flutter from fence posts, tables sag under piles of questionable meat pies, bread loaves and sticky fruits. Children run barefoot, shrieking with the kind of glee that means something's about to break. People dance in circles, clap in time, spin until they drop laughing into the mud. And at the centre of it all is a man with a drum banging out a beat like he's trying to wake the dead. You stand at the edge of it, unsure. You're still sore from castle work, still haunted by the whispers of plague, still so layered in road dust you're not entirely sure what colour your face is anymore. But the music pulls you forward anyway. It doesn't care who you are or what you've done. It just wants more feet in the circle. A young girl grabs your hand and pulls you into the ring. No questions asked, no judgment. Just a grin missing 2 teeth and a strength in her little arm that nearly yanks your shoulder out. You stumble, laugh, and spin with the rest. Here's your historical fact. Festivals were crucial to medieval life. In a world dominated by labour and religion, they were brief, vital interruptions. There were religious feast days, dozens of them, each tied to a saint, a season, or a miracle. There were secular celebrations too, harvest festivals, midsummer revels, and village fairs. They weren't just excuses to drink, though plenty of that happened. They were release valves, community glue, and sometimes subtle acts of rebellion against monotony and suffering. The villagers are dressed in their best, or at least their least filthy. You spot someone in a jerkin that's been patched with actual care, a woman with ribbons braided through her hair, a man wearing boots that actually match. Music comes from pipes, lutes, drums, and then someone smacking a spoon rhythmically against a pot. You join in clapping. You try to learn a song. You mangle the chorus, but no one cares. Joy is in short supply here, and tonight everyone's hungry for it. You're handed a cup of something. It's warm, sweet, and possibly alcoholic. It burns in your throat like a hug from a drunken uncle. A woman next to you offers a slice of pie. You hesitate, because you've learned, but she insists. For the feast, she says, you'll offend the saint. You nod solemnly and eat it. It tastes like apples, cinnamon, and pure redemption. Here's your quirky fact. Dancing in the Middle Ages wasn't always legal. In some periods and regions, the church cracked down hard on excessive merriment, especially dancing that got too wild or too mixed gender. But people did it anyway. They danced in barns, in streets, in secret. There were even reports of dancing plagues, mass hysteria episodes where people danced uncontrollably for days, sometimes until they collapsed. Some called it spiritual ecstasy. Others called it demonic possession. You just call it Saturday. Night falls and the festival lights up. Torches ring the clearing, the musicians pick up speed. Laughter thickens the air. You're swept into another round of dancing, this one messier, louder, more joyful. Someone spins you. You fall in the mud. Everyone cheers. And here comes tonight's scholarly debate. Were these festivals simply distractions from hard lives or something deeper? Some historians argue they were moments of sanctioned chaos, see rebellion, social inversion, where peasants mocked their lords, men dressed as women, and the poor pretended to be rich. Others suggest they reinforced social order, with ritualized roles and rules that subtly reminded people of their place. Probably both are true, but tonight, none of that matters. Tonight is about rhythm, firelight, and the brief illusion that nothing outside this circle exists. As the music slows, you sit on the edge of the clearing, watching the last dancers whirl through the grass. The fire crackles, the sky glows with stars that look too bright to be real. For the first time in what feels like weeks, no one's watching you suspiciously. No one's asking who you are or where you're from. You're just a body among other bodies, sweating, laughing, and full. A man plops down beside you and offers a hunk of cheese. You dance like a donkey with a nail in its hoof, or on its hoof, he says cheerfully. You all grin. I've been practicing. He laughs and claps you on the back. You'll get there. You sit together in comfortable silence, eating cheese and watching sparks rise into the sky. Somewhere behind you, a couple sneaks off into the woods. A child giggles in their sleep. The music drifts back in, slower now, almost mournful, the kind of song that says, we're alive, even if we don't know why. Eventually the villagers begin to drift home, leaning on each other, singing half-remembered verses. You stay by the fire until it's mostly embers. Someone leaves you a blanket without a word and you wrap it around your shoulders and lie back in the grass. The stars above are sharp and infinite. You think of everything you've survived, plague, stocks, castles, mistakes, and realise you're still here. Somehow. Still breathing, still learning, still dancing. By now, you've figured out that in medieval Europe, every moment you're not being charged for something is a moment someone just hasn't figured out how to charge you yet. You wake the morning after the festival with dried mud on your boots, the faint sound of someone snoring into a mug beside the fire pit, yes, and the unsettling realisation that you owe somebody something. Not money necessarily, though that's always a possibility, but time, labour, loyalty, or, worst of all, taxes. You make your way back toward the village proper, muscles sore from dancing and your breath still thick with smoke and cider. The place feels quieter now, like a hangover has settled over everything. You pass a man sweeping ash from the square. A cart creaks by with someone slumped half asleep atop a sack of cabbages. And then, near the well, you see it. A man with a scroll. He's standing on a small stool, barely taller than the crowd around him, but his voice carries. It has that trained nasal authority only possessed by people who've never worked a day in their life and don't plan to. He unrolls the scroll and begins to read, eyes darting from line to line like the words are offensive even to him. It's a tax list. He's calling names. Every few seconds he pauses and announces how much each person owes. Coin, grain, labour. Chickens, wool. One poor soul apparently owes 3 hens and a week of roofing. Whatever that means. People grumble. One man mutters a string of curses and gets elbowed by his wife. Another argues. But the scribe doesn't look up. He just taps the scroll and moves on. You shrink into the background as you always do. Your name isn't on the list. But it could be if anyone decides you've overstayed your welcome. You've managed to scrape by with odd jobs and leftover food, but in this world, nothing is free forever. Someone always wants something. And if they don't want money, they want labour, or loyalty, or both. Here's your historical fact. Medieval taxation wasn't just about money, it was about control. There were land taxes, hearth taxes, marriage taxes, and sometimes absurdly specific ones, like bridge tolls, mill fees, or feather duty for sleeping under more than one blanket. The church demanded tithes, usually 1/10 of everything you earned, grew or found, because God apparently had expensive tastes. And if you couldn't pay in coin, you paid in goods. If not goods, then labour. And if you couldn't manage any of those, that's when things got uncomfortable. You watch as a woman offers a basket of eggs instead of coin. The tax collector inspects it like it's a suspicious package. Finally he nods. She hurries away before he changes his mind. Now comes your quirky fact. In some towns, tax debts could be inherited. Yes, if your father owed back taxes, congratulations, you now owe them. This led to entire families being locked in cycles of debt for generations. In more than a few cases, people left their villages in the dead of night just to escape the list. Becoming a vagabond was risky, but so was starving while technically at home. You consider leaving again, not dramatically, just quietly. Slip out one morning, find another village, blend in again. But you also know the system is the same everywhere. Different lord, same rules, different tax collector, same scroll. You could spend the rest of your life running from numbers written in ink. The village elder spots you. She hobbles over, nodding slowly, and says, "Heard you helped with the fish haul last week." You nod back, cautiously. "That counts for something," she says. "We'll see." Then she walks away, leaving you with a sense of impending bartering. Later that afternoon, you're offered a job helping repair a fence around the barley field. The man offering it is red-faced and blunt, but not cruel. He explains the deal. 3 days' work and you're off the list for a while. Maybe longer if the Lord doesn't come sniffing around. You accept. You've learned to accept without asking too many questions. The list is abstract until your name is on it. then it becomes your whole life. As you hammer splintered wood back into place and shoo away curious goats, you overhear more conversations about taxes. Someone's cart got confiscated, someone else lost a cow. A young man argues with his uncle about whether it's better to lie low or just go to the castle and pledge fealty directly, hoping for better treatment. Better treatment probably means not being whipped for breathing too loudly. Here's your scholarly debate for the day. Was medieval taxation deliberately oppressive or simply chaotic and necessary? Some historians argue the system was exploitative by design, created to keep peasants permanently poor and dependent. Others claim it was a clumsy attempt at organising resources in a time without calculateurs or centralised records. Either way, it didn't feel fair, and in the absence of fairness, resentment brewed like ale left in the sun too long. You finish the fence just before sunset. Your hands are blistered, your shirt sticks to your back, but you're handed a slice of barley bread, a half-empty jug of water, and something more valuable, a quiet nod of acknowledgement. You're no longer just the stranger, you're the one who patched the barley fence. That night, you sit by the fire with a few of the other workers. No one talks about money. They talk about the harvest, the weather, the time old Eamon tried to fight a goose and lost. It's funny, it's ordinary, it's safe, but you still feel the list. Even when no one reads it aloud, it's there, hovering like smoke, always ready to name names. You understand now that surviving here isn't just about food or weather or avoiding plague, it's about staying off the list. Or at least staying far enough down it that no one comes knocking with a sack and as a rope. You lie down on your mat, eyes on the ceiling, heart slower now. You're not rich, you're not free, but for one more night, you're not in debt. And that's everything. It's a sword, a real one. Long, heavy and gleaming slightly even in the grey light of early morning. You find it resting against a wooden rack near the training yard of the local manor house, unattended for all of 5 seconds before your inner modern instincts betray you, and your hand reaches out like you've just stumbled onto Excalibur. You grip the hilt. It's heavier than you expect, not unliftable, just dense, like it knows more about murder than you do. You freeze mid-lift as a voice growls from behind you. That's not a toy. You turn sheepishly to see a man in a padded gambeson watching you with arms crossed and a look that suggests he's seen too many people like you. Eager, clueless, probably not long for this world. You know how to use that, he asks. You consider saying yes. Then you remember that swinging a foam blade in a LARP session doesn't qualify as training. You shake your head. He sighs. Didn't think so. But instead of taking it from you, he points to the field. You want to learn, and he asks. You'll earn it. And just like that, you become a squire, or something vaguely like one. You're not technically attached to a knight, and no one is calling you my page, but you spend the next several days hauling armour, feeding horses, polishing mail until your fingers go numb, and watching men hit each other with sticks that absolutely do bruise. Your introduction to medieval weapons is not a romantic one. There's no elegant duelling, no dramatic training montage, just relentless repetition and dull pain. You start with a wooden waster, a practice sword, and try to master the footwork, which is more dancing than slashing. Step forward, step back, guard, parry, repeat until your calves scream. Here's your historical fact. Real medieval swords weren't nearly as heavy as people think. Most longswords weighed between 2.5 and 4 pounds. They were balanced, meant for both cut and thrust, and used in combination with grappling, kicks, and the occasional desperate prayer. The armour they were designed to face off against evolved over time, from mail to plate, and so did the weapons, axes, maces, polearms. You quickly learn that being armed in this era doesn't make you powerful, it makes you responsible for not dying creatively. Your instructor is a grizzled veteran with more scars than you'd prefer to count, and the patience of someone who's trained idiots before teaches you the difference between a fenimmt and a flourish, why swinging wide gets you killed, and how to use your opponent's momentum against them. He also teaches you how to fall, which you do, constantly. By the end of the week, your arms ache so badly that lifting a spoon feels like an act of heroism, but you've improved. You can disarm a lazy opponent. You can land a blow without tripping over your own feet. You're still not ready for a real fight, but you look like you might survive one. Maybe. And here's your quirky fact. Some knights trained with pigs. Not on pigs, against them. Pigs were smart, quick, and weirdly aggressive. making them perfect for simulating unpredictable enemies. There's even a legend about a boar killing a knight during a training session gone horribly wrong. You ask your instructor about this. He just laughs and says, "We use drunk stable boys instead, less screeching." During a break, you get your hands on a crossbow. It's crude, powerful, and terrifyingly silent. You fire it once, and the bolt thuds into a target with a force that makes you take a step back. There's no dramatic twang, no warning, just sudden, final impact. You hand it back with the care of someone passing off a loaded missile. Tonight's scholarly debate: was the medieval warrior truly an elite professional or just a well-fed bully with fancy gear? Traditionalists point to the chivalric code, knightly orders, and rigorous training regimes. Critics argue many knights were rich brutes whose loyalty was for sale, and whose moral code conveniently flexed around looting. The truth is, as always, somewhere in between. There were noble warriors, and there were absolute disasters in armour. You've met both, sometimes in the same person. That evening you help clean the weapons. You oil a blade slowly, the repetitive motion calming. The metal feels real now, not just a symbol, but a tool. You understand now what it means to carry one, what it costs. You're offered a test the next day, sparring, in front of others you think about declining. Then you think about everything you've been through. The stocks, the plague, the fields, the festivals. You pick up the waster and nod. You lose, of course, but not immediately. Not embarrassingly. You land one solid hit before being knocked on your back by a spinning disarm that takes your legs out from under you. The crowd laughs. Your instructor grunts approval. "Better than your first day," he says. "You didn't die." You take it as high praise. You leave the yard that night with a bruise on your hip, a split lip, and a strange, unexpected pride. You might never be a knight. You might never win a duel. But you understand now what those stories leave out: the mud, the blood, the sheer exhausting grit of it. And you know this much: if someone swings at you tomorrow, you won't just stand there. You'll raise your sword. And that, in this world, is everything. You miss books, not the idea of them. You've seen a few here. Massive, chained to lecterns filled with spidery Latin script that looks like it was written during an earthquake. You miss real books, pages you can turn without fear of tearing ancient vellum, sentences in modern English, fiction, instructions, anything with margins that don't smell like a damp goat. The first time you see a proper manuscript up close, you're sweeping out a chapel annex. It's not glamorous work. You're sneezing through clouds of dust while a bored-looking monk mutters prayers and rearranges candle stubs. But then he opens a cabinet, unlocks it with a key hung from his belt like it's guarding treasure, and lifts out a volume. You pause mid-sweep. The book is huge, maybe 18 inches tall, bound in cracked leather with a silver clasp. He doesn't open it immediately. He just holds it like it might vanish. You watch his face soften, like he is in the presence of something sacred. And maybe he is. Here's your historical fact. Books in the Middle Ages were hand-copied, incredibly expensive and painstakingly made. Each page was vellum, calfskin, stretched and scraped. Each letter was written with a quill, each image painted by hand. It could take months or even years to finish a single book, depending on its size and complexity. Monasteries were the main production houses, and monks often worked by candlelight, bent over desks until their backs gave out or their eyes failed. You try to look away, but you can't, so the monk sighs and beckons you over. To your shock, he lets you see the page, just one. The Latin means little to you, but the illustration is stunning. Rich blues and reds forming a golden-winged angel. You point to it. He grins. "Illuminated," he says. You repeat the word like a prayer. He lets you help dust the library for the next week. There are only 7 books, but each one is treated like a holy relic. You begin to realise they are. These books aren't for entertainment. They're for keeping truth alive, preserving it, copying it, sometimes censoring it too. You notice one volume where a passage has been carefully scraped away, then rewritten. You ask casually, "Mistake?" The monk's face flattens. "Correction," he says. You don't ask again. Here's your quirky fact. There were books bound in human skin. Not common, thankfully, but it happened, usually as a form of morbid commemoration or punishment. You don't see one here, but the possibility chills you. Some medieval librarians took preservation very seriously. You ask if you can learn more. Read, maybe. The monk narrows his eyes. "Can you read Latin?" You shake your head. He shrugs. "Then learn." And just like that, he hands you a slate and a piece of chalk. You begin with the alphabet, written in precise lines. A, B, C, then syllables, then whole words. Days pass. Weeks. You practice between chores. Your fingers are always smudged with chalk. The other villagers think you're being punished. They call it penance reading. You don't correct them, but here's the thing, literacy is power. Quiet, slow-burning power. Once you can read, even a little, the world cracks open. Signs start making sense. Names, lists. You spot your name in a tithe ledger and realise they've been spelling it wrong. You see a warning posted outside the church, something about contagion and keeping to your homes, and realise half the town hasn't obeyed because they can't read it. The monk lets you translate, loudly. You do. People listen. And here's your scholarly debate for tonight. How widespread was the literacy in the medieval world, really? For a long time, the assumption was that almost no one outside the clergy could read. But modern research suggests it was more complicated. Many merchants, craftsmen, and even some peasants had functional literacy. Enough to read a contract, write their name, understand a sign. Not enough to read philosophy, but enough to survive. You realise how fragile knowledge is, how easily it's hoarded, locked away in books that only a few can read. You begin to understand why the church keeps such a tight grip on learning, why they're so suspicious of wandering preachers, foreign scholars, and, if you're honest, people like you. One afternoon, while helping copy a psalm, you scribble a few words in the margin. Not Latin, not even English, really. Just a message. I was here, still learning. You draw a tiny sun beside it. The monk doesn't notice. Or maybe he does and says nothing. Eventually you stop coming to the scriptorium as often. Chores pull you away. The monk becomes distant. You suspect someone higher up noticed your curiosity and decided it was getting dangerous. Your slate is taken. The door is locked. The message is clear. That's enough learning for you. But you remember. Letters. Words. Sentences. They rattle around your skull like bright pebbles, reshaping the way you see everything. The Bible verse painted above the chapel arch. The carved names on a memorial stone. The list of wheat rations on the mill wall. You're not a monk, you're not a scholar, but you are no longer illiterate. And in this world, that's the sharpest weapon you've got. The forest doesn't feel like nature. It feels like an entity, a presence, something old and vast and only barely tolerating your existence. You weren't planning to go into the woods. You've heard the stories, everyone has. Bandits, wolves, spirits, the occasional lost fool whose bones are found months later, picked clean by silence. But you took a wrong turn near the mill after dark and now you're surrounded by trees taller than anything you've ever seen outside a fantasy novel. The sun is setting too fast. The path is more of a rumour than a trail. And then comes the howling. It's distant at first. One sharp cry on the wind, then a second, closer. Your whole body tightens like someone just rang an alarm in your chest. You don't run. That's the one rule everyone agrees on, is shown. If you run from a wolf, you become prey. So you keep walking deliberately, calmly, like someone who isn't starting to mentally write their last will and testament. You glance behind you every few seconds, just in case a pair of glowing eyes appears in the underbrush. Here's your historical fact. Medieval Europeans had a complicated relationship with nature. Forests were feared and revered, often portrayed as dark, magical spaces where danger lurked and rules broke down. Wolves were a real threat, especially to livestock and lone travellers, and weren't officially hunted into near extinction until the 18th and 19th centuries. In the Middle Ages, they were everywhere. You find a fallen log and decide to climb it. Height isn't much, but it's something. You sit still, heart hammering, and wait. The howling doesn't return, but the rustling never stops. Something's out there. Maybe a wolf, maybe a deer, maybe something that's been here longer than humans have had words for fear. Then you hear a laugh, human and close. It's followed by a voice. You're not very good at hiding. You spin and see a woman, mid-30s, wrapped in a fur-lined cloak, her face smudged with dirt and ash. She carries a bow and a very large knife. You don't know if she's a bandit or a miracle. She watches you for a beat before speaking again. You're either lost or stupid, maybe both. You nod. Lost, mostly. She sighs, steps closer and jerks her head. Come on, it's getting dark and something's following you. You follow because, frankly, your other option is to become dinner. She leads you to a small camp tucked between rocks, almost invisible until you're standing in Nepoet. There's a fire pit, a hide tent, some carefully stored dried meat. She hands you a blanket and says, "Don't scream if you hear the owl, it's just an owl unless it's not." Then she lies down and pulls a hood over her face. You don't sleep much. Here's your quirky fact. In the Middle Ages, forests weren't just feared, they were legally restricted. Many were designated royal forests, meaning commoners couldn't hunt, fish, or even gather wood without permission. Getting caught poaching could mean losing a hand, or worse. But of course people did it anyway. Survival tends to outweigh royal rules. The woman who rescued you, probably one of them, by morning she's already cooking something in a pot. You ask what's in it. She says, "Don't ask, you don't." You help her gather kindling, refill a water skin, fix a snare. She doesn't talk much, but you get the sense she's been living like this for years. She moves like someone who trusts nothing and knows everything. Her name, she says, is Ellen. She says it like a test, like she might change it tomorrow. And here's your scholarly debate. Were forests lawless places of danger and rebellion, or did they form their own kinds of communities and codes? Traditional historians saw forests as wild margins, places of exile and threat. But newer scholarship suggests that people who lived in or near the woods, hunters, herbalists, charcoal burners, developed their own systems of order and mutual support. Not lawless, just different to law. Ellen shows you a shortcut out of the forest the next day. She doesn't say goodbye, just grunts and disappears behind a thicket like a ghost in leather. You realise you'll probably never see her again, or if you do, it'll be because she's watching you long before you see her. You step out of the trees and into the light like you've crossed back into a different world. The road is just ahead. You can see smoke from a village fire in the distance, people, order, rules. But a part of you hesitates. Out there in the woods, there was danger, but also a strange kind of freedom. No tithes, no lists, no collars around your identity. You could just be unrecorded, alive. You shake the thoughts loose. The wolves aren't gone, they're just waiting. You adjust your bag, tighten your belt and start walking. You made it through the forest. You're not the same person who walked in, and you're not entirely sure if that's a good thing. There's a clanging bell and everyone freezes. Not the soft, chiming bell that calls for prayer or the gentle toll of a funeral. This one rings fast and hard as if the air itself needs warning. You're in the middle of scrubbing potatoes outside the cook's hut when it starts, and the lad beside you, young, usually lazy, always humming, goes white as chalk and bolts for the barn without a word. Everyone else follows suit. Within seconds the square is empty. Pots abandoned, doors slammed. Even the dogs scatter. You stand there for half a moment too long before someone grabs your arm and hisses, "Get inside, now!" You get the sense that the bell isn't just noise, it's permission. To panic, to hide, to forget politeness and make sure you survive. You duck into the nearest building, a narrow storage shed that smells like old onions and fear, and wedge yourself behind a barrel. For a few minutes, all you hear is your own breath, sharp and fast, echoing in the wooden walls. Then footsteps. A lot of them. Heavy. Armoured. Not running, marching. When you peek through the slats, you see them. Soldiers, maybe 20, on horseback, wearing the kind of matching livery that says they're not here for trade. Swords at their hips, crossbows slung over shoulders. They move with the easy authority of people who know no one will challenge them. You've seen enough movies to know the look. You just never thought you'd see it from the wrong century. Here's your historical fact. Roving bands of soldiers, sometimes official, sometimes mercenary, were a constant threat in medieval life. During wars, and there were always wars, troops often lived off the land, which is a polite way of saying they stole, pillaged, and terrorised villages they passed through, friend and foe alike. There were even specific names for them: routiers, free companies, broken men. Some were dismissed soldiers turned bandits. Others were just opportunists. The lead rider stops in the centre of the square and calls out, voice thick with authority and boredom. He's demanding supplies, grain, ale, maybe even horses. In the name of the king, he says, but no one believes that. That phrase is just code for don't bother resisting. A few villagers emerge, slowly, carefully. The reeve steps forward, hat in hand. He tries to negotiate, but the lead soldier laughs and points at the tavern. "Start there," he says. The others dismount and you hear the sound of a door being kicked in. You stay hidden, heart in your throat, hands clenched around the useless wooden spoon you're still holding. It's not bravery that keeps you there, it's caution. You've seen what happens when strangers ask too many questions. Here's your quirky fact. It wasn't uncommon for medieval villagers to bury or hide their valuables, coins, jewellery, even food, before troops came through. Some even buried entire chests, which is why we still find hoards today. You think of the woman who always tucks her cured meat into a hole under her floorboards. Smart. You mentally note the location in case things go very, very wrong. The soldiers raid the tavern, then the grain shed, then the smithy. One of them comes out gnawing on a carrot like he owns the place. Another slaps a boy across the face for standing too close. When the boy's father steps forward, the soldier draws his sword just enough for the metal to catch the sun. The father backs down, fast. Here comes your scholarly debate. Were medieval soldiers truly agents of order, or chaos wrapped in metal? Some historians argue that knightly codes and military discipline kept troops in check. Others say that once you give a man a weapon and let him sleep in mud for 6 months, the first thing he'll do when he reaches a village is abuse that power. You're inclined to believe the latter, especially as you watch one of them casually urinate against the church wall. Eventually, the soldiers gather what they want and ride off without fanfare. They don't burn anything. They don't kill anyone, this time. But the silence they leave behind is not relief, it's aftermath. You creep out from the shed. The villagers begin to emerge, one by one, like scared animals sniffing the air. Someone sobs, someone swears. The reeve is already taking inventory, lips tight. The tavern door hangs askew. The grain shed is half empty. The smith is yelling about stolen tools. You pick up a fallen sack of barley, help a woman patch her broken shutter. No one says thank you. Everyone is just moving, as if stopping would make the damage permanent. That night the tavern is quiet. The usual laughter is gone. People drink, but it's stilent drinking, stiff, mechanical. You overhear mutterings about the Lord, about how he does nothing, about how he probably sent the soldiers. You realise no one actually knows who ordered this, just that someone did, that someone, somewhere, gets to point and take and leave without answering to anyone. You go to sleep with your cloak wrapped tight, a knife under your straw mat and one ear open. You dream of hoofbeats and coins rolling out of bags you don't own. Tomorrow, life will continue. People will work, laugh again, maybe. But the fear doesn't go away, it just recedes. Until the next clanging bell, until the next visit. And now you understand not all danger here comes from wolves or plague. Sometimes it rides in broad daylight, carrying the law on its back. It ends, not with a battle or a plague wave or a dramatic chase, but with the slow creeping awareness that you're ready to leave. You don't say it aloud. There's no one here who'd understand or who wouldn't immediately accuse you of heresy for even suggesting there's a way to leave this timeline. But the truth simmers quietly in the back of your mind, and then one morning, as you sit by the stream with your feet in the cold water and a crust of bread in your hand, it finally crystallizes into a full thought. I've seen enough. It's not that you hate it here. Strange as it sounds, there are things you've come to love. The simplicity of routines, the realness of work that ends when the sun does, the way people look each other in the eye when they speak, because distractions haven't been invented yet. You've carved out something like a life, a network of chores, nods, fire-warmed conversations, even the occasional smile that says you belong, at least a little. But it's also exhausting. Living in the past, really living here, means constant vigilance against hunger, against suspicion, against the bone-deep chill of winter seeping through your straw bed. You've learned to wear your quiet like armour. You've grown calluses on your hands and on parts of your personality you didn't even know could toughen. You've been so cautious for so long that it's hard to remember what it feels like to be truly yourself. Here's your historical fact. For most people in medieval Europe, life was local, painfully local. You lived, worked, married, and died often within a few miles of the same spot. The horizon wasn't just distant, it was theoretical. Travel was rare, roads were unsafe, maps weren't widely available, and even if they were, who had time to go wandering when the field wouldn't plant itself? You were never meant to stay here. You know that now, not just intellectually, but in your bones. You miss your language, your music, running water, socks that match, you miss books with too many fonts, you miss light bulbs. You miss laughing without worrying if it'll attract attention. You miss being weird without it being life-threatening. But mostly you miss choice. Back home, you could decide things. Here, choice is a privilege reserved for lords and clergy. The rest of the people simply endure, and pray that next winter doesn't take more than the last one did. You walk the village one more time. You pass the baker's apprentice, now missing 2 teeth from a drunken scuffle that no one remembers starting. You nod to the herbalist who helped your fever with a concoction of things you hope were plants. You avoid the reeve, whose list of taxes has only gotten longer. You stop near the chapel, watch a priest recite prayers from a book only he can read and think, even their god has a gatekeeper. Here's your quirky fact, Trysil. In some medieval villages, people believed that travelling too far from home could damage your soul, that leaving behind your familiar land, your soul place, might confuse the spirits, or even prevent your ancestors from finding you in death. It sounds superstitious, but now, having lived here, you get it. There's something binding about this place, heavy, sticky, like the mud after rain. It holds people whether they want to stay or not, and yet you're not from here. That simple truth is more than just a technicality. It's a compass. So you pack. There's not much, just a bag of essentials, dried bread, a wool blanket, the small stone the village child gave you after you fixed her doll's arm, the last stub of candle. You take one of the charcoal sticks from the hearth and write a message in the dirt near your sleeping spot. Gone walking. It's vague enough to be believable, poetic enough to be remembered. You leave at dawn, no one sees you go. The mist hides you, and the woods, familiar now, welcome your steps without question. You follow the same path you took months ago when you first arrived, lost and out of place and clueless. Only now you know what direction you're heading. Here's tonight's scholarly debate, and the last one you'll need. Is it possible to understand a time without being part of it? Historians wrestle with this constantly. Can we truly grasp the emotions, the fears, the values of people who lived so differently from us? Or are we just tourists, layering modern perspectives onto old bones? You've lived it now. You've eaten their food, worn their clothes, nearly died in their streets. You've seen their joy, their cruelty, their remarkable endurance. You'll carry those impressions back whether you want to or not, and maybe that's the point. By the time the trees thin and the world begins to change, gently, impossibly, you feel it first in your chest. A lightness, a loosening of rules, as if time itself is exhaling, letting you slip through a crack between centuries. You don't look back. You already know what's behind you. You arrive elsewhere. Maybe not quite home yet, but not the Middle Ages either. You step onto a road with gravel instead of mud, pass a post with faded writing in a font you know. The air smells like gasoline and old grass. You hear a dog bark, and it's just a dog, not an omen, not a symbol, just loud and hungry. You survived it. All of it. Not cleanly, not heroically, but honestly. And when someone finally asks where you've been, whether it's tomorrow or years from now, you'll pause, smile and say, "Long story." You're back now. No more smoke in your lungs, no more straw in your bed, no more watching your words like they're knives balanced on your tongue. The sky's a little brighter here. The air smells like new plastic and electricity. You look around and realise just how fast the world actually moves, how smooth it is, how clean, how absurdly full of blinking lights and soft chairs and food that comes out of machines instead of fields. But something's shifted inside you. You don't rush like you used to. You move with a slower awareness. Like someone who's had to make fire from scratch, you listen differently. To conversations, to silence, to the sound of people laughing without worry. Your fingers trace surfaces now and wonder how they were made. You wash your hands and remember when water wasn't a guarantee. You bite into fruit and half expect it to be rotten or stolen. You don't forget the people either. The girl who danced until she collapsed in the mud. The boy who sang love songs on a barrel. The priest who carried more doubt than scripture. The woman in the woods, eyes sharp as a hawk's. They live in your memory now, shadows, echoes, companions. Not perfect, not noble, just human, like you. Maybe you time-travelled. Maybe you dreamed. Maybe history got its hands on you and refused to let go. Doesn't matter. You came back carrying something you didn't have before. Perspective. So next time life feels overwhelming, try this. Light a candle, turn off your phone, and imagine a world where every small thing you take for granted was a miracle. Because once upon a time it was.